Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Red Plus. So in this video, we will see, what if Harry was a natural Legilimens at age 4 and learned all of the Dursleys' secrets. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The Cupboard's Gift. The hunger was the worst part. Harry had learned to endure the darkness of the cupboard under the stairs, the musty smell of old coats and forgotten shoes, the way his spine pressed against the slanted ceiling when he tried to sit up. He'd learned to ignore the spiders that occasionally dropped onto his face at night and the draft that crept through the gap beneath the door in winter. But the hunger, the hollow, gnawing emptiness that made his stomach cramp and his head swim, that was something he could never quite get used to. He was 4 years old, though he only knew this because Aunt Petunia had mentioned it while complaining about the cost of his existence. For years of feeding another mouth, she'd said to Mrs. Next Door over the fence, her voice carrying through Harry's tiny window. 4 years of charity for my worthless sister's brat. Tonight, Harry had been sent to his cupboard without supper because he'd done something wrong. He wasn't sure what, exactly. Dudley had fallen off his new tricycle and scraped his knee, and somehow that was Harry's fault. It was always Harry's fault. Through the thin walls, he could hear the television droning in the living room, some program about cars that Uncle Vernon liked. The smell of roast chicken still lingered in the air, and Harry's stomach clenched painfully at the reminder of what he'd watched the Dursleys eat while he sat in the corner, forbidden to join them. He pressed his small hands against his belly and tried to think about something else. Sometimes, if he concentrated hard enough, he could make the hunger feel distant, like it was happening to someone else. He closed his eyes and breathed slowly, reaching for that strange quiet place inside himself where nothing hurt quite so much. And then, without warning, the world cracked open. It started as a whisper, no, not even that. A sensation. Like catching the edge of a conversation from another room, but instead of words, it was feelings. Irritation. Boredom. The comfortable weight of a full stomach. A vague resentment toward something, someone, bloody waste of money, that school, teaching them all sorts of nonsense about feelings and sharing. Dudley doesn't need that rubbish. What he needs is discipline, same as I got, and look how I turned out. Harry's eyes snapped open in the darkness. That was Uncle Vernon's voice, but it wasn't coming through the walls. It was inside his head, as clear as if his uncle were sitting right beside him, muttering into his ear. Should have put my foot down with Petunia about the boy years ago. Can't send him to school with Dudley, obviously. People would talk. But keeping him in the cupboard isn't working either. Someone's bound to notice eventually, and then there'll be questions, investigations. Harry pressed himself against the wall, heart pounding. This wasn't possible. People couldn't hear thoughts. Could they? Was he going mad? Aunt Petunia always said his mother had been strange, unnatural. Maybe this was what she'd meant. Maybe the strangeness was inside Harry too, like a disease, and now it was finally showing itself. What Petunia doesn't understand is that the freak could ruin everything. Everything I've built. If Grunnings ever found out about the arrangement with Morrison, I'd be finished. £20,000. That's what I've moved into the offshore account so far. 20,000 that should have been reported as taxable income, and if anyone ever looks too closely, the thoughts kept coming, a flood of them now, and Harry couldn't make them stop. He clapped his hands over his ears, but it made no difference. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It was inside, behind his eyes, in the space where his own thoughts lived. The boy's freakishness is probably genetic. Petunia's always saying her sister was wrong in the head, doing things that weren't natural. Well, if he starts showing signs of that, I'll beat it out of him. Worked for my father, it'll work for me. Harry curled into a ball on his thin mattress, knees drawn to his chest, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. He didn't understand what was happening. He didn't want to know these things, didn't want to hear Uncle Vernon's ugly, hateful thoughts about him, about his mother, about money and secrets and beating the wrongness out of children. But the thoughts wouldn't stop. They kept coming and coming, a river of them, and now there were other voices joining in. Wish he'd stop watching that dreadful car program. I've told him 100 times I can't stand it, but does he listen? Of course not. Vernon never listens. Just like he never noticed how I cried for weeks after Lily died, never once asked me if I was all right. That was Aunt Petunia. Harry could feel her now, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of tea going cold in her hands, and beneath the familiar sharp irritation there was something else. Something old and heavy and sad. I shouldn't still miss her. After everything she did, everything she became, I shouldn't still wake up sometimes and forget she's dead. But she was my sister. My little sister. And I'll never forgive her for leaving me, for choosing that world over her own family, for getting herself killed and dumping her wretched child on my doorstep. Harry's tears came harder now, but silently. He'd learned very young not to make noise when he cried. It only made things worse. The letter said he was special. Dumbledore's letter. Said the boy had to be protected, that dark forces might come looking for him, that our home was the only safe place because of the blood we shared. Lily's blood in my veins, making us family whether I liked it or not. I burned that letter, but I remember every word. Every bloody word. The thoughts came faster, deeper, pulling Harry down into places he'd never meant to go. He saw flashes of memory that weren't his, a girl with red hair laughing in a summer garden, the same girl crying at a train station, a letter edged in green and gold, screaming matches across dinner tables, a wedding Petunia wasn't invited to, an owl delivering news that froze the world solid. He saw his mother. Not clearly, Petunia's memories were like looking through dirty glass, but enough. Red hair like flames. Green eyes exactly like his own. A smile that could light up a room. And then the other memories, the darker ones. Fire in the night sky. A house reduced to rubble. A baby crying in the arms of a giant man, a lightning bolt wound fresh and bleeding on his forehead. Magic. The word surfaced from Petunia's thoughts like something rotting floating up from deep water. She hated that word. Feared it. Magic was what had stolen her sister, what had gotten Lily killed, what lived in the freakish little boy sleeping in the cupboard beneath the stairs. Magic was real. Harry was magic. The flood of revelations was too much. His young mind, stretched to its breaking point, did the only thing it could. It shut down. Harry fell into a sleep so deep it was almost like death, and he dreamed of green light and screaming and a high, cold laugh that made his scar burn like fire. He woke with a headache. Pale morning light crept through the vent in the cupboard door, and Harry could hear Aunt Petunia already up, banging pots in the kitchen with more force than necessary. His mouth was dry and his stomach ached, and for a long, disorienting moment, he couldn't remember why he felt so strange. Then it came back. All of it. Harry sat up slowly, wincing as his head throbbed. The voices were still there, quieter now, more distant, but definitely there. He could feel Aunt Petunia's simmering resentment like a low hum at the edge of his awareness. Uncle Vernon was still asleep, his mind murky and sluggish with dreams Harry didn't want to examine too closely. Dudley was scared. Harry blinked. He hadn't expected that. Dudley was a bully, a spoiled terror who'd made Harry's life miserable from the moment they could both walk. But there, beneath the surface, Harry could feel something he'd never imagined. Dudley was frightened of his father. Frightened of the sudden rages, the heavy hand that sometimes swung without warning, the cold silences that could last for days. Dudley was afraid that if he wasn't perfect, wasn't everything his father wanted, he'd end up like Harry. Alone. Unloved. Locked in a cupboard in the dark. The discovery sat strangely in Harry's chest, like a stone he didn't know what to do with. He'd hated Dudley for as long as he could remember. But this was something different. Something complicated. He didn't have time to think about it. The cupboard door rattled, and Aunt Petunia's sharp voice cut through the morning air. "Get up, boy. You're making breakfast, and if you burn the bacon again, there'll be no lunch either. Harry pushed himself off the mattress and opened the door, squinting against the sudden brightness. Aunt Petunia stood over him, thin and angular, her face already settled into its familiar lines of disgust. But now Harry could see beneath it, could see the way she looked at his eyes, his mother's eyes, and felt a knife twist in her heart every single time. "Yes, Aunt Petunia," he said quietly. He walked to the kitchen, and as he passed her, he caught a flash of her thoughts. "Looks more like her every day, curse him. Why couldn't he have looked like his father? At least then I wouldn't have to see her face staring back at me across the breakfast table." Harry filed the knowledge away and began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. His hands knew the routine: crack the eggs, lay the bacon in the pan, don't let anything burn, but his mind was elsewhere, racing through everything he'd learned the night before. Uncle Vernon was stealing money. £20,000, hidden in some kind of secret account, enough to destroy his career if anyone found out. That was leverage. That was power. Aunt Petunia knew about magic. Not just that it existed, but details: Dumbledore's name, the letter explaining why Harry had to stay with them, something about Lily's blood providing protection. She'd burned the letter, but the words were still there in her memory, sharp and clear as the day she'd read them. Harry was famous in the magical world. His parents hadn't died in a car crash, they'd been murdered by a dark wizard so terrible that people still feared to speak his name. And somehow, impossibly, baby Harry had survived the killing curse that had taken his mother and father, had destroyed the monster who cast it, had become a symbol of hope for an entire hidden society. He was the boy who lived. The bacon sizzled in the pan, and Harry stared at it without really seeing. His entire life, everything the Dursleys had told him, was a lie. His parents had been heroes. They'd died protecting him. And instead of being celebrated, instead of being raised among people who understood what he was, he'd been stuffed in a cupboard and treated like an inconvenience. A new emotion stirred in Harry's chest. It wasn't the resigned acceptance he'd lived with for so long. It wasn't even the desperate hope that maybe someday things would get better. It was anger. But even as the anger flared, something else rose to meet it, a cold, clear voice that seemed to come from deep inside himself. Be smart. Be patient. They don't know what you can do. That's your advantage. Don't waste it. Harry took a breath and flipped the bacon. The voice was right. Throwing a tantrum wouldn't change anything. If he screamed at the Dursleys about their lies, they'd just punish him more. If he tried to run away to the magical world, he'd be caught and brought back within hours. He was 4 years old, small and weak and completely dependent on people who despised him. But knowledge was different. Knowledge couldn't be taken away. And now Harry had more knowledge than anyone suspected, more than the Dursleys, more than whoever was watching him from the magical world, more than anyone. He served the breakfast without burning anything, ate his own meager portion in the corner while the Dursleys ignored him, and spent the rest of the morning doing his chores with perfect, silent efficiency. And all the while, his mind was working, planning, learning. This was just the beginning. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Harry's young life. He learned that his gift, he couldn't think of another word for it, was always there, humming at the edges of his consciousness like a radio tuned to a station only he could hear. At first, it was overwhelming. Every strong emotion in the house hit him like a wave: Uncle Vernon's rage, Aunt Petunia's bitter sorrow, Dudley's greedy excitement, even the simple contentment of next-door's cat sunning itself on the fence. But gradually, Harry learned to control it. Not to turn it off entirely, he wasn't sure that was possible, but to filter it, to push the constant background noise to a distant murmur and only pay attention when he chose to. It was like learning to focus on a single conversation in a crowded room while ignoring all the others. The more he practiced, the stronger his control became. And the stronger his control became, the deeper he could reach. Surface thoughts were easy, the irritated internal monologue that ran through everyone's head, the momentary flashes of desire and annoyance and boredom that made up daily life. But beneath that surface, there were layers. Memories. Secrets. The things people hid even from themselves. Uncle Vernon, for instance, thought of himself as a hard-working, respectable man who'd earned everything he had. But deep in his mind, Harry found the truth, a childhood of poverty and shame, a father who'd drunk away every paycheck, a burning determination to never be weak again that had curdled into something ugly. Vernon had started skimming money from Grunnings almost by accident, a small amount at first, to cover an unexpected expense, then more and more as he convinced himself he deserved it. Now he was trapped, terrified that his carefully constructed life was built on a foundation of fraud that could collapse at any moment. Aunt Petunia was more complicated. Her hatred of magic, of Harry, of everything connected to Lily, it was real, but it was also a mask. Beneath it lay grief so profound it had calcified into something like stone. She'd loved her sister once, desperately, and the day Lily had gotten her Hogwarts letter had broken something inside Petunia that had never healed. Every cruelty she'd inflicted on Harry was, in some twisted way, revenge against the sister who'd left her behind. And then there was Dudley. Harry had expected to find nothing but ugliness in his cousin's mind, the same petty meanness that Dudley showed on the outside. Instead, he found a frightened little boy who'd learned that love was conditional, that he had to be the biggest and loudest and greediest because the moment he wasn't, his parents' attention would slip away. Dudley bullied Harry because it was the only thing that made his father smile. Dudley demanded toy after toy because gifts were the only language of affection he understood. It didn't make Harry forgive him. But it did make him understand. A month after his gift first awakened, Harry discovered something important: he could hide his own thoughts. It happened by accident. He'd been washing dishes while Aunt Petunia stood behind him, her mind radiating the usual cocktail of resentment and exhaustion, and Harry had thought something careless, "I wonder if she knows Uncle Vernon cried in the garage last night," and instantly felt a spike of panic. What if she could hear him? What if this gift went both ways? But Aunt Petunia had just sighed and wandered back to the living room, completely oblivious. And when Harry reached toward her mind to check, he found nothing. No awareness of his presence at all. She couldn't feel him reading her thoughts any more than she could feel him breathing the same air. Still, the scare had taught him a lesson. His thoughts were his own, for now. But if there were others like him out there, others who could do what he could do, he needed to be careful. He needed to learn to hide. So he practiced. At first, it was just holding certain thoughts very still, not letting them ripple out where someone might sense them. Then it became something more sophisticated, a kind of wall around his mind, smooth and featureless, reflecting nothing back to anyone who might try to look inside. He tested it on Aunt Petunia first, deliberately projecting an image of himself as dull and unremarkable while he stood right in front of her. Her eyes slid past him like he wasn't even there. Then he tried it on Vernon, and on Dudley, and finally on a stray dog that wandered into the garden, all with the same result. His shield held. His secret stayed secret. Harry was 4 years old, and he'd already learned that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't power. It was the appearance of powerlessness. The library became his sanctuary. It was a 20-minute walk from Privet Drive, but that was fine. The Dursleys were always happy to have him out of the house, and as long as he was back before dinner, no one questioned where he went. The librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Carmichael, had been suspicious at first. 4-year-olds didn't usually wander into public libraries alone. But Harry had looked up at her with his mother's eyes and asked, very politely, if he could please have a library card, and something in her had melted. He read everything. History, science, mathematics, literature. His young mind was a sponge, and the books were an endless ocean. But more valuable than the books themselves was what he learned from Mrs. Carmichael's thoughts. She had a degree in child psychology. She'd worked with troubled children before. And she saw Harry with a clarity that no one else in his life possessed, saw the too thin frame, the flinching at loud noises, the desperate hunger for knowledge that burned behind his careful politeness. She suspected abuse. She'd even considered calling child services. But Harry's file had been flagged somehow, marked as a case that shouldn't be pursued, and every time she tried to investigate further, she hit a wall of bureaucratic resistance that made no sense. Someone's protecting him, she thought one afternoon, watching Harry pore over a book about Greek mythology. Or protecting someone else. Either way, that boy isn't safe. Harry pretended not to notice. But he filed the information away, one more piece of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. He was 5 when he first deliberately manipulated someone. Dudley had been given a new toy, an elaborate construction set with hundreds of pieces that he had no idea how to use. After an hour of frustrated attempts, he'd thrown a tantrum and demanded his mother build it for him, then lost interest before she was halfway done. The finished construction sat on a shelf in his room, untouched for weeks. Harry wanted it. Not because he particularly cared about the toy, but because he wanted to see if he could get it. A test of his abilities. He started small. A thought, carefully projected, Dudley doesn't even like that thing. It's just taking up space. Then another, I bet he'd forget about it completely if it weren't sitting right there. Over the next few days, Harry kept up a gentle pressure, never enough to notice, always disguised as Dudley's own thoughts. And slowly, Dudley's attitude toward the construction set shifted. He stopped looking at it. He started thinking of it as old, boring, something for babies. On the 5th day, Dudley threw the construction set in the trash. Harry retrieved it that night, smuggled it into his cupboard in pieces, and spent the next week building things by candlelight while the Dursleys slept. It wasn't the toy that mattered. It was the proof. He could influence people. Shape their thoughts without them ever knowing. And if he could do it to Dudley, he could do it to anyone. The power terrified him. It also, in a way he was too young to fully understand, thrilled him. But there were limits. Harry discovered them the hard way. Uncle Vernon was spiraling. The pressure of his secret, £20,000 stolen, the fear of exposure growing every day, was eating him alive. He'd started drinking more, raging more, and the violence that had always lurked beneath his respectable surface was increasingly breaking through. One night, when Harry was 5.5, Vernon came home from work in a mood so black that Harry felt at the moment the car pulled into the drive. Something had gone wrong. Someone had asked questions. The auditors were getting too close. Harry knew what was coming. He could see it in Vernon's mind, the desperate need to lash out, to find someone to blame, to prove that he was still in control of something. And who better than the freak nephew, the unwanted burden, the living reminder of everything Vernon feared and couldn't understand. So Harry tried something new. Instead of just shielding himself, instead of just reading and observing, he pushed. He reached into Vernon's mind and tried to turn the rage away, tried to plant a thought, it's not the boy's fault, leave him alone, like he had with Dudley and the construction set. It didn't work. Vernon's mind was different. Harder. The rage wasn't a surface emotion that could be redirected, it was something fundamental, something that went all the way down. Harry's push slid off it like water off oiled stone, and all he managed to do was draw attention to himself in a way that Vernon, even without understanding why, could sense. What are you looking at? Vernon snarled, catching Harry's eye as he came through the door. Standing there staring like a little freak. Think you're better than me? Think you know something? Harry knew, in that moment, that he'd made a terrible mistake. The beating that followed was the worst of his life. Not because Vernon was particularly creative, he never was, but because there was a focused intensity to it that hadn't been there before. As if, on some level, Vernon knew that Harry was a threat. Not just an inconvenience, not just a reminder of unwanted obligations, but something dangerous that needed to be broken before it grew strong enough to fight back. Afterward, curled in his cupboard with blood on his lip and bruises blooming across his ribs, Harry made a promise to himself. He would never try to control Vernon again. Not directly. Not until he was strong enough to win. But that didn't mean he was powerless. There were other ways to fight. The plan took months to put together. Harry couldn't attack Vernon openly. He couldn't even influence him subtly. But he could influence the world around him, the systems and structures that Vernon relied on to feel safe. He started with small things. A folder left on Vernon's desk at home, papers relating to the offshore account, visible just long enough for Petunia to notice before Harry made sure it disappeared again. She didn't say anything, but a seed of suspicion had been planted, and Harry could feel it growing in her mind. Then there were the mistakes at work. Vernon was already stressed, already making errors, and it was easy enough for Harry to give him a little push at just the wrong moment, a thought about the auditors that made him mistype a number, a flash of paranoia that made him forget to file an important form. Each incident was minor on its own. Together, they formed a pattern. The auditors noticed. Of course they did. Grunnings was a large company, and large companies paid attention when their accounts didn't quite add up. Harry didn't know exactly when the investigation began. He just knew that one morning, about 3 months after Vernon's worst beating, his uncle came down to breakfast with a face the color of old cheese and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Problems at work?" Petunia asked, and Harry could feel the sharp edge of her suspicion mixing with genuine concern. "Nothing," Vernon snapped. "Nothing at all. Mind your own business." But it wasn't nothing. Harry could see it in Vernon's mind, the questions, the scrutiny, the terrible certainty that the walls were closing in. The offshore account had been discovered. Not all of it, not yet, but enough to raise red flags. Enough to put Vernon's career, his reputation, his entire carefully constructed life in jeopardy. Harry watched his uncle across the breakfast table and felt something he'd never experienced before. Satisfaction. He was 6 when he learned the word for what he could do. The library had a section on psychology, dry academic texts that Mrs. Carmichael had been surprised to see him reading. Most of it was beyond his understanding, but he was persistent, working through the complicated words one at a time, building his vocabulary through sheer stubborn repetition. Then he found a book about mythology and folklore, and everything changed. Legilimency, the book said, was a term from old European legends, the supposed ability to read minds, to see into the thoughts and memories of others. Wizards and witches in medieval stories were often credited with the power, and it was both feared and desired by ordinary people who dreamed of knowing what their neighbors truly thought. Harry read the passage 3 times, his heart pounding. Legilimency. There was a word for it. There were stories about it. Which meant he wasn't the first. He wasn't alone. The book went on to describe defenses against legilimency, a discipline called occlumency, the art of shielding one's mind from intrusion. Harry devoured every word, recognizing with a shock that he'd already developed something similar on his own. The walls he'd built around his thoughts, the smooth blankness he projected to the world, that was occlumency, or something like it. But what really caught his attention was a passing reference near the end of the chapter. According to the legends, true legilimency wasn't a skill that could be learned. It was a gift, something you were born with, something that manifested in childhood and grew stronger with age. Those who possessed it naturally were called natural legilimens, and they were considered both blessed and cursed, blessed because no secret could be hidden from them, cursed because they could never stop hearing the darkness that lived in other people's hearts. Harry sat in the library's quiet reading room and thought about all the ugly things he'd seen in the minds around him. Vernon's greed and cruelty. Petunia's poisoned grief. The casual cruelties that ordinary people inflicted on each other every day without even realizing it. Cursed. Yes. That felt right. But he was also blessed, wasn't he? He knew things no one else knew. He could protect himself in ways no one else could. And someday, when he was old enough and strong enough, he would walk into the magical world with eyes wide open, seeing through every deception, understanding every hidden motive. Someday, he would never be powerless again. The day before Harry's 7th birthday, a woman came to visit Arabella Figg. Harry noticed her immediately. Not because she was unusual, just an ordinary-looking woman with graying hair and a kind face, but because her mind was different. Brighter somehow, with patterns and colors that Harry had never encountered before. Like the difference between a black and white photograph and a painting in full color. She was a witch. Harry was weeding Mrs. Fig's garden at the time, a task he'd volunteered for after noticing how much the old woman struggled with her joints. It gave him an excuse to be close to her house, to listen in on her conversations, to piece together the role she played in the strange web of protection that surrounded his life. He knew by now that Mrs. Fig was a squib, a term he'd pulled from her thoughts, meaning someone born into a magical family but without magic of their own. He knew she was watching him on Dumbledore's orders, reporting back to someone named McGonagall about his health and treatment. He knew she felt guilty about not doing more to help him, even as she convinced herself that his suffering was necessary for some greater purpose. Now, crouched behind the rose bushes with dirt on his hands and his mind stretched toward the house, Harry listened as Mrs. Fig welcomed her visitor and began to talk. "Nothing's changed, Emmeline. The boy's still being treated like a servant, barely fed, wearing rags that wouldn't be fit for a house elf. But every time I try to report it to Muggle authorities, the paperwork gets lost. Every time I suggest to Dumbledore that he should be moved somewhere safer, I get the same answer: the blood wards are too important, he has to stay with his aunt." "I know." The witch's voice was soft, sad. "I don't like it either, Arabella. But Dumbledore insists the protection is essential. There are still Death Eaters out there who would love to get their hands on the boy who lived. The wards around Privet Drive are the only thing keeping him safe." "Safe from what? Dark wizards?" Mrs. Fig laughed bitterly. "What about protection from his own family? Have you seen the bruises on that child, Emmeline? Have you looked into those eyes and seen what they've done to his spirit?" A long pause. Harry held his breath. "I've seen them," Emmeline said quietly. "I see them every time I visit. And I report them to Dumbledore, just like you do. But he says Harry has to stay. He says the wards won't work anywhere else, that Petunia's blood is the key. He says it's for the greater good." Mrs. Fig's voice was hollow. "I've heard it before. I just didn't think I'd have to watch a child suffer for it." They moved on to other topics after that, gossip about mutual friends, news from the magical world that Harry only half understood. But his mind was racing, fitting pieces together, seeing the shape of something vast and complicated that he was only beginning to understand. Dumbledore. The name kept coming up, in Petunia's memories, in Mrs. Fig's thoughts, in this conversation between old friends who both seemed to admire and fear the man. He was the head of a school, Harry knew that much. The leader of some kind of resistance movement. The one who had decided that Harry's safety was worth more than his happiness. Harry thought about the years of hunger and darkness and pain. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs and the bruises that never quite healed. He thought about a little boy who had never known kindness, who had learned to survive by reading the ugliness in others and turning it to his advantage. Was it worth it? Was he worth it? He didn't know. He couldn't know, not yet, not without more information. But he was going to find out. One way or another, he was going to learn everything about the world that had thrown him away, and then he was going to decide for himself what kind of person he wanted to be. The weeds came out easily that afternoon. Harry's hands were steady and sure. Inside, the witch named Emmeline reached out with her mind, a casual brush of legilimency, the kind that most magical people used without even thinking about it, and encountered something that made her pause. A wall. Smooth and featureless and completely impenetrable. She looked out the window at the thin, dark-haired boy working in the garden, and for just a moment, a chill ran down her spine. Then she shook it off. He was just a child. There was nothing to be afraid of. She went back to her tea and forgot all about it. 2 weeks later, Harry sent his first letter to Gringotts. He'd spent days working out the wording, practicing his handwriting until it was neat enough to be legible, and most importantly, learning exactly what he needed to say. The goblins, according to Mrs. Fig's thoughts, were notoriously suspicious of humans. They wouldn't respond to a polite inquiry from a child. They needed proof, proof that he was who he claimed to be, proof that he had the right to access the Potter accounts. Blood. That was the key. Goblin magic could recognize bloodlines with perfect accuracy, and a letter sealed with the writer's blood was as good as a magical oath. Harry wrote the letter by candlelight in his cupboard, keeping his thoughts carefully blank in case anyone was watching. Then he pricked his finger with a sewing needle he'd stolen from Aunt Petunia's kit, let 3 drops fall onto the parchment, and sealed it with melted candle wax. To the account manager of the Potter family vault, he wrote. My name is Harry James Potter. I am 7 years old, and I would like to inquire about my family's finances. I apologize for any inconvenience this request may cause, but I have reason to believe that I have not been properly informed about my inheritance. Enclosed is blood verification of my identity. I await your response. He signed it with his full name and, after a moment's thought, added a postscript. I can be reached at number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Please be discreet, my guardians are not aware of this correspondence. Getting the letter to a post box was the easy part. Harry had learned to move through the neighborhood like a ghost, noticed by no one, remembered by fewer. The hard part was waiting. 3 days passed. Then 4. Then 5. On the 6th day, Harry woke to find an owl sitting on the windowsill of his cupboard. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Pure white feathers, enormous golden eyes, and a letter clutched in its beak that practically hummed with magical energy. Harry reached out, his heart pounding, and the owl dropped the letter into his hands with a soft hoot before vanishing into the early morning mist. The seal was Gringotts' crest, a goblin face in profile, surrounded by crossed axes. Harry broke it with trembling fingers and read, Dear Mr. Potter, your inquiry has been received and verified. The Potter family vaults have remained untouched since your parents' deaths, per the instructions left in their will. As the sole heir to the Potter estate, you have full legal access to these assets, regardless of your age or the wishes of your Muggle guardians. However, we note with concern that you appear to be unaware of your family's status. According to our records, you should have received annual statements and a summary of your inheritance on your 11th birthday. If these communications have been intercepted or withheld, this constitutes a serious breach of wizarding law. We would welcome the opportunity to meet with you in person to discuss your accounts and answer any questions you may have. For security reasons, this meeting would need to take place at Gringotts, London, accessible through the Leaky Cauldron pub on Charing Cross Road. Please respond at your earliest convenience. A suitable escort can be arranged if required. Your servant in gold, Ironclaw Senior Account Manager, Potter Family Holdings. Harry read the letter 3 times. Then he read it again. Full legal access. That meant money, money that was his, that no one could take away. A serious breach of wizarding law. That meant someone had been hiding things from him, keeping him ignorant and dependent. And Potter Family Holdings. Not just a vault. Holdings. Plural. Harry folded the letter carefully and tucked it beneath his mattress. Then he sat in the darkness of his cupboard and smiled. The game had only just begun. Aunt Petunia was crying again. Harry heard her from the kitchen, soft hiccuping sobs that she tried to muffle with a tea towel. Uncle Vernon was at work, his position was still intact, somehow, though the investigation had left him a shadow of his former self. Dudley was at a friend's house. The house was empty except for Petunia and the nephew she'd never wanted. Harry could have ignored her. He could have stayed in the garden, pulling weeds and planning his next move, treating her grief as just another piece of information to be catalogued and used. That was what the cold, calculating part of him wanted to do, the part that had learned to survive by never letting anyone see weakness. But there was another part. Smaller, quieter, but still there. He walked into the kitchen. Petunia looked up, startled, and for a moment her face twisted into the familiar mask of disgust. But she was too tired to maintain it, too worn down by years of bitterness and the weight of secrets she'd never shared. The mask slipped, and what was left behind was just a woman. A sad, lonely woman who had lost her sister and never stopped grieving. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice rough. Harry didn't answer immediately. He stood there, small and thin and utterly still, looking at her with eyes that saw far too much. Then he said something he'd never said before. "You miss her?" "Lily. My mother." Petunia flinched like he'd slapped her. "How dare you? You have a photograph. Hidden in the attic, in a box you've never shown anyone. It's from before she got her letter, when you were still friends. You're both laughing. You keep it because it reminds you of what things were like before magic took her away." The color drained from Petunia's face. "How do you know that?" Harry could have lied. Could have said he'd found it while cleaning, or made up some other explanation. But something in him, that small, quiet part that hadn't been completely burned away, decided to tell a different kind of truth. "I know a lot of things, Aunt Petunia. Things you've never told anyone. Things you've tried to forget." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I'm not going to use them against you. I wanted you to know that I understand. About Lily. About why you hate me." Petunia stared at him. Her mind was a storm of confusion and fear and something else, something that might have been hope, or might have been horror. "You're like her," she whispered. "The same, wrongness. I always knew it would come out eventually." "Maybe," Harry said. "Or maybe I'm just me. I haven't decided yet." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving his aunt alone with her tears and her memories. Behind him, he felt her thoughts churning, old certainties crumbling, new questions forming, the first cracks appearing in a wall that had stood for years. Harry didn't know if what he'd done was kindness or cruelty. He wasn't sure it mattered. But as he stepped into the garden and felt the summer sun on his face, he realized something important. He didn't have to be cold. He didn't have to let the ugliness he saw in others turn him into something ugly too. He could choose. Every day, with every thought and action, he could choose who he wanted to be. It wouldn't be easy. The world he was about to enter was full of danger and deception, and his gift would show him the worst of it in brutal detail. But maybe that was exactly why he needed to hold on to the best parts of himself, the parts that could look at Aunt Petunia's grief and feel something other than contempt. Maybe that was what made him different from the monster who had killed his parents. Harry picked up his trowel and went back to weeding. The owl from Gringotts had promised an escort could be arranged. That meant someone would come for him soon, someone from the magical world, someone who could take him away from Privet Drive and show him where he truly belonged. He was ready. He'd been ready for years. All he had to do was wait. The waiting ended 3 days later. Harry was in the garden, as usual, when he felt it, a mind approaching that was neither Muggle nor quite like anything he'd encountered before. Sharp. Ancient. Utterly alien. He looked up and saw a small figure walking down Privet Drive. At first glance, it might have been mistaken for a child, barely 3 feet tall, with a gait that was somehow both shuffling and precise. But as it drew closer, the illusion fell away. A goblin. Here. In Little Whinging. Harry stood slowly, brushing dirt from his knees, and watched the creature approach. Its mind was fascinating, layers upon layers of thought that moved in patterns no human brain could replicate. Numbers and calculations and ancient grudges all woven together into something that felt like mathematics made conscious. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said, stopping at the garden gate. Its voice was like gravel scraping against iron. "I am Ironclaw. We have much to discuss." Harry looked at the goblin. The goblin looked back. "Yes," Harry said. "I believe we do." He opened the gate and stepped through. Behind him, the cupboard under the stairs sat empty. The door hung open, swinging slightly in the breeze from a window someone had forgotten to close. Harry Potter was finally going home. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the serpent among lions. The leaky cauldron smelled of pipe smoke and old magic. Harry stood in the doorway, letting his eyes adjust to the dim interior while his mind stretched outward, tasting the thoughts of everyone inside. There were perhaps 20 people scattered across the pub, witches and wizards nursing drinks, a harried-looking woman herding 3 children toward the back, an old man in the corner whose mind was so fogged with age that Harry could barely read it at all. And beneath the surface thoughts, woven through every consciousness like threads of gold in dark cloth, was magic. Not the pale echo he'd sensed in Emmeline's mind or the sharp alien patterns of goblin thought. This was something richer, deeper, a current that connected every magical person in the room to something vast and ancient that Harry could feel but not quite comprehend. "This way, Mr. Potter." Ironclaw's voice cut through his wonder, and Harry realized he'd been standing frozen in the doorway for nearly a minute. "Our business is in the bank, not the tavern." Harry followed the goblin through the pub, keeping his head down and his shields tight. No one paid them much attention. A goblin escorting a child wasn't unusual enough to warrant comment, and Harry's scar was hidden beneath his fringe. Still, he caught fragments of thought as he passed. Told Marlene the cauldrons were defective, but does she listen? If the minister thinks he can push through that legislation without, poor little thing, looks half-starved. Someone should. That last thought came from the harried mother, who'd paused in her wrangling to glance at Harry with worried eyes. He met her gaze briefly, offered a small smile that he hoped was reassuring, and kept walking. Her concern was genuine, which made it more uncomfortable than the casual indifference of the others. The back of the pub opened onto a small courtyard, and Ironclaw approached the brick wall with the air of someone performing a tedious but necessary ritual. His long fingers tapped a specific pattern, and the bricks began to fold away like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing, Harry forgot how to breathe. Diagon Alley stretched before him, a riot of color and motion and life that made everything he'd seen before seem gray and flat by comparison. Shops with windows full of impossible things lined both sides of the cobblestone street. Owls swooped overhead, carrying packages and letters. Witches and wizards in robes of every imaginable color bustled past, their minds a symphony of thought and feeling that washed over Harry like a wave. And the magic. God, the magic. It was everywhere, in the stones beneath his feet, in the air he breathed, in the very light that seemed to fall differently here than in the Muggle world. Harry's gift had always shown him the truth beneath appearances, but here there was no beneath. Everything was exactly what it appeared to be, wonderful, terrible, and utterly, impossibly real. "Mr. Potter." Ironclaw's voice was patient but firm. "The bank." Harry tore his gaze away from a shop window displaying what appeared to be a miniature dragon made of clockwork and followed the goblin down the street. His mind was racing, cataloging everything, the names of shops, the faces of passers-by, the snippets of conversation that drifted past. He was building a map, he realized. Not just of the physical space, but of the invisible web of relationships and power structures that connected everyone here. Gringotts rose at the end of the alley like a monument to wealth and paranoia. White marble columns flanked bronze doors that were covered in warnings and protective runes, and goblin guards in ceremonial armor stood at attention on either side of the entrance. Their minds were locked down tight, professional occlumency that Harry recognized but couldn't penetrate without effort he wasn't willing to expend. Inside, the bank was even more impressive. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, and rows of goblins worked at tall desks, weighing coins and examining documents with expressions of profound suspicion. The air hummed with protective enchantments, and Harry could feel wards pressing against his consciousness like invisible walls. "Welcome to Gringotts, Mr. Potter." Ironclaw led him past the main hall toward a corridor that branched off to the right. "Your account review will take place in a private office. Please keep your hands visible and refrain from any hostile magic." "I don't have a wand," Harry pointed out. Nevertheless. The goblin's expression didn't change. "Policy is policy." The office was small but luxurious, leather chairs, a desk of dark wood, and walls lined with what appeared to be genealogical charts. Ironclaw settled behind the desk and gestured for Harry to sit, then pulled a thick folder from a drawer and began laying out documents. "Let us begin with the basics, Mr. Potter. Your family's holdings consist of 3 vaults, the trust vault established for your education, the main Potter family vault, and a smaller vault containing personal effects your parents wished preserved. The total liquid assets across all 3 vaults amount to approximately 473,000 galleons." Harry had done the math. He knew roughly what that meant in Muggle terms. But hearing it stated so plainly still made something twist in his chest. "That's a lot," he said carefully. "For a family of recent prominence, yes. The Potters were not always wealthy. Your great-great-grandfather made his fortune in potions development, specifically, a hair growth formula that remains popular to this day." Ironclaw's thin lips twitched. "Wizards are remarkably vain about their appearance. And the non-liquid assets?" The goblin raised an eyebrow. "You've done research." "I've done what I can." Harry kept his voice steady. The library had limited resources on wizarding economics. Ironclaw studied him for a long moment, his alien mind inscrutable. Then something shifted, a decision made, a calculation completed, and when he spoke again, his tone was fractionally warmer. "In addition to the monetary holdings, the Potter estate includes a townhouse in London, a cottage in Godric's Hollow that was destroyed during the war, and various investments in magical businesses. There is also a seat on the Wizengamot, the wizarding legislative body, that has remained vacant since your father's death." "A seat," Harry repeated. "You mean a vote?" "I mean power, Mr. Potter. Political influence that has been dormant for 7 years while various factions squabbled over your future." Ironclaw leaned forward. "You are not merely wealthy. You are, potentially, one of the most influential figures in magical Britain. And until this moment, no one has bothered to tell you." Harry let that sink in. His mind was already working through the implications, the allies he could gain, the enemies he would make, the careful balance of power that his mere existence had been disrupting since the night his parents died. "Who's been managing the estate?" he asked. "Someone must have been making decisions while I was unavailable. Albus Dumbledore holds magical guardianship over your assets, granted by the Wizengamot in the aftermath of the war. He has made no withdrawals from your vaults and has not exercised your political rights." Ironclaw's expression was carefully neutral. "However, he has also blocked several inquiries into your welfare and prevented the goblins from contacting you directly. Until I contacted you. Blood magic supersedes all other authorities, Mr. Potter. Your letter, sealed with your own blood, established your identity and your intent beyond any doubt. We were legally obligated to respond." The goblin paused. "And, if I may speak frankly, several of us were curious." Harry tilted his head. "Curious about what?" "About the child who reached out to Gringotts before his 7th birthday. Who wrote with the vocabulary of an adult and the caution of someone twice his age. Who sealed his letter with blood because he somehow knew that was the only way to guarantee our attention." Ironclaw's eyes glittered. "You are not a typical child, Mr. Potter. The goblins have learned to pay attention to atypical individuals." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Harry could feel Ironclaw's mind pressing against his shields, not attacking, just examining. Testing. The goblin knew there was something different about him. He just didn't know what. Harry made a decision. "May I ask you something, Ironclaw? Something personal?" The goblin's eyebrows rose. "You may ask. I may not answer. When you look at me, what do you see? Not the boy who lived, not the Potter heir. Just me. What do you see?" Ironclaw was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than Harry had heard it before. "I see a child who has been hurt. Who has learned to survive by watching and waiting and never revealing more than necessary. I see intelligence and caution and a hunger for control that comes from having none." The goblin paused. "I see myself, Mr. Potter. As I was, a very long time ago. Harry nodded slowly. It was, he thought, the most honest thing anyone had ever said to him. Then I think we can do business together, he said. I think we can do quite a lot of business. Ironclaw smiled. It was not a pleasant expression, too many teeth, too sharp, but it was genuine. Indeed we can, Mr. Potter. Indeed we can. The tour of his family's vaults took 3 hours. The trust vault was modest, piles of gold and silver and bronze coins, enough to fund his education several times over. Harry ran his fingers through the galleons and felt the magic humming in each one, ancient enchantments that prevented counterfeiting and ensured the coins would never tarnish. The main vault was something else entirely. They descended through layers of security that made Harry's skin prickle, wards that checked his blood, his magic, even his intentions. A dragon guarded one of the lower levels, chained and half-mad from centuries of captivity, its mind a swirl of rage and hunger that made Harry flinch. And finally, at the very bottom of the bank, they reached a door of solid iron inscribed with runes that glowed faintly in the darkness. The Potter family vault, Ironclaw announced. Untouched since November 1981. The door swung open, and Harry stepped inside. It was like entering a museum dedicated to his own history. Portraits of ancestors lined the walls, men and women with his dark hair in varying eye colors, some in medieval robes, others in Victorian suits, all watching him with expressions of curiosity and assessment. Chests of gold filled one corner, but there were other things too, books, weapons, jewelry, artifacts whose purposes Harry couldn't begin to guess. And in the center of the room, on a pedestal of black marble, sat a ring. Harry knew it was important before he even approached. The magic radiating from it was unlike anything else in the vault, old and patient and somehow aware. He reached out with his mind, very carefully, and felt something reach back. Potter, the ring seemed to whisper. Blood of my blood. Will you claim me? The family ring, Ironclaw said, his voice hushed with something that might have been respect. It has rejected every attempt to move it since your parents' deaths. It was waiting for you. Harry stood before the pedestal and looked at the ring. It was simple, a band of gold with a small ruby set in the center, but he could feel the weight of centuries pressing down on it. Every Potter who had ever lived had worn this ring. Every decision they had made, every battle they had fought, every sacrifice they had offered, it was all there, encoded in the metal and stone. He reached out and picked it up. The magic hit him like a wave, and suddenly he wasn't in the vault anymore. He was standing in a sunlit garden, watching a man with messy black hair chase a laughing toddler across the grass. He was kneeling in a church, exchanging vows with a woman whose red hair gleamed like fire. He was standing on a battlefield, wand raised, as dark shapes closed in from every direction. 1,000 lives, 1,000 memories, all compressed into a single instant of contact. Harry staggered but didn't fall. His mind, trained by years of processing other people's thoughts, absorbed the flood of information and filed it away for later examination. The ring slid onto his finger like it had always belonged there. Well, Ironclaw said, after a long moment of silence. That was unexpected. Harry looked down at the ring, now glowing faintly on his right hand. What was unexpected? The family magic. It usually takes hours to establish a connection, sometimes days. You just absorbed 7 centuries of accumulated knowledge in approximately 3 seconds. The goblin's eyes were wide. What exactly are you, Mr. Potter? Harry smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. I'm still figuring that out, he said. But I think it's going to be interesting. Arabella Figg was not happy to see him. Where have you been? She demanded, the moment Harry walked through her door. I've been worried sick. Your aunt said you wandered off this morning and never came back, and I've had half the order searching, the order. Harry interrupted, settling himself in her worn armchair like he belonged there. You mean Dumbledore's organization? The one that fought in the last war? Arabella's mouth opened and closed several times. Her mind was a tangle of shock and fear and the desperate calculation of someone trying to figure out how much damage had been done. "How do you know about that?" she finally managed. "I know about a lot of things, Mrs. Fig." Harry crossed his legs and regarded her calmly. "I know you've been watching me since I was a baby. I know you report to Dumbledore about my health and safety. I know you've seen the bruises and the malnutrition and the way the Dursleys treat me, and I know you've told yourself it's for the greater good." The old woman sank into the chair across from him, her face pale. "I also know," Harry continued, "that you're not a bad person. You're just scared. Scared of Voldemort coming back, scared of what might happen if the blood wards fail, scared of going against Dumbledore's wishes. And I understand that. Fear makes people do things they wouldn't otherwise do. Harry." Arabella's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm not angry with you. Not really. But I need you to understand something." Harry leaned forward, and for a moment, the mask of childish calm slipped away, revealing something older and harder beneath. "I am not a chess piece. I am not a weapon to be sharpened and stored until the war starts again. I am a person, with my own thoughts and goals and plans, and from now on, I will be making my own decisions." Arabella stared at him. Her thoughts were chaos, guilt and fear and a growing sense that the child sitting before her was not, had never been, what she'd assumed. "What do you want?" she asked. "Information. Allies. Understanding." Harry sat back. "I want to know everything you know about Dumbledore's plans for me. I want to know about the war, about my parents, about the prophecy that made Voldemort target my family. And I want you to stop reporting on me like I'm an asset to be monitored." "Prophecy?" Arabella's confusion was genuine. "I don't know anything about a prophecy." Harry filed that away. "Interesting. The inner circle knew things that the outer circle didn't. Then tell me what you do know." "Everything. And in exchange, I'll tell Dumbledore that you've been doing your job admirably and should be commended for your service." That's blackmail. It's negotiation." Harry smiled. "I learned it from watching my uncle. He's quite good at it, when he's not drinking himself into a stupor." For a long moment, Arabella said nothing. Her mind churned through possibilities and consequences, weighing loyalty against conscience, fear against something that might have been hope. Then she sighed and began to talk. The weeks that followed were the busiest of Harry's life. He established a routine, mornings at the library, studying everything he could find about British law, finance, and politics, afternoons visiting Mrs. Fig, pumping her for information about the magical world while carefully maintaining the illusion that he was merely curious rather than calculating, evenings at Privet Drive, keeping his head down and his shields up while the Dursleys navigated their slow-motion collapse. Vernon's situation had deteriorated further. The investigation had been closed without charges. Someone in the magical world had apparently intervened, though Harry couldn't figure out who or why, but the damage was done. Vernon had been passed over for promotion, then quietly shuffled into a dead-end position where he couldn't embarrass the company. His drinking had increased. His violence had become more erratic. Harry avoided him when he could and endured when he couldn't. The beatings were painful, but they were also useful. Each one made his eventual departure more justified, and each one taught him something new about controlling pain and fear. The scar on his forehead, he noticed, had started to react to strong emotions. When Vernon's rage peaked, when Petunia's grief spiked, when Dudley's terror broke through his walls, the lightning bolt mark would throb faintly. Harry filed this away with all his other observations, one more piece of a puzzle he was slowly assembling. Through it all, his correspondence with Gringotts continued. Ironclaw had become something like an ally, not a friend. The goblins didn't do friendship, but a business partner whose interests happened to align with Harry's own. The goblins sent regular updates on the Potter investments, introduced Harry to the basics of magical finance, and occasionally included bits of political intelligence that weren't strictly part of his job description. It was through Ironclaw that Harry first learned about Lucius Malfoy. One of the more influential members of the Waisengemot, the goblin wrote. Old family, old money, old connections. He was tried as a Death Eater after the war but claimed to have been under the Imperious Curse, a mind control spell that removes personal responsibility. The courts accepted his story, though few believe it. He now positions himself as a respectable conservative, advocating for traditional values while quietly advancing pure-blood supremacist causes. He has made several inquiries about your family's assets over the years. None have been successful. Harry read the letter 3 times, memorizing every detail. Then he went to the library and researched everything he could find about the Malfoy family in the Muggle world, business connections, property holdings, charitable donations. It wasn't much, but it was a start. You're very interested in that family, Mrs. Carmichael observed one afternoon, looking over his shoulder at the company registry he was examining. Research for a school project, Harry said smoothly. You're not in school. It's a personal project. Mrs. Carmichael studied him for a long moment. Her thoughts were warm with concern but also with something like respect. She'd watched this strange, quiet child devour books that most adults couldn't understand, and she'd long since stopped underestimating him. Just be careful, she said finally. Some families don't like people poking into their business. I know. Harry turned a page. That's why I'm being thorough. His 8th birthday passed without notice from the Dursleys. Harry spent it in Diagon Alley, using a glamour charm that Ironclaw had arranged, a minor enchantment that made his scar invisible and his features forgettably ordinary. He wandered through the shops for hours, drinking in the sights and sounds and magical signatures of everything he encountered. Flourish and Blots had a small section on mind magic that Harry devoured in a single afternoon. Most of it was useless, theory without practice, warnings without substance, but there were a few gems hidden in the academic jargon. He learned that natural Legilimens were incredibly rare, perhaps 1 in 100,000 wizards. He learned that their abilities typically manifested between ages 3 and 5, and grew stronger with practice and exposure to other magical minds. He learned that the most powerful natural Legilimens in recorded history had been a wizard named Salazar Slytherin, who had founded one of the 4 houses at Hogwarts and eventually gone mad from the weight of other people's thoughts. That last detail gave Harry pause. Madness. It was a risk he hadn't fully considered. But when he reached into himself, searching for signs of instability, he found only the same cold, clear awareness that had served him since his gift first awakened. His mind was organized, compartmentalized, rigorously controlled. The ugliness he saw in others didn't overwhelm him because he'd learned to observe it without absorbing it, like a doctor examining disease without contracting it. He wasn't going mad. Not yet, anyway. In Nocturne Alley, Harry encountered something that changed everything. He'd been exploring the darker corners of the wizarding world, carefully shielded and glamoured, when he felt it, a mind that was wrong. Not evil, exactly, though there was plenty of darkness there. Wrong in a fundamental way, like a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit. The wizard was ordinary-looking. Middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of forgettable face that blended into any crowd. His surface thoughts were bland to the point of suspicious, must remember to pick up milk, meeting at 3, hope the weather holds, but beneath that surface was something else. A void. Cold and empty and utterly loyal to something, someone, that the wizard wouldn't even name in his own mind. Harry watched from a distance as the man entered a shop that sold dark artifacts. He didn't follow. Instead, he found a quiet corner and sat very still, replaying what he'd sensed in his memory. The void wasn't natural. It felt constructed, like the mental walls Harry had built around his own thoughts. But where Harry's shields were meant to keep others out, this wizard's void was designed to keep something in. To contain his true thoughts so completely that even a Legilimens would see only the surface. Professional occlumency. The kind that only came from years of training. Or from serving a master who demanded absolute secrecy. Harry thought about Voldemort. About the Death Eaters who had followed him, who had tortured and murdered in his name. Many had been caught and imprisoned after the war. But not all of them. Some had claimed the Imperius Defense, like Lucius Malfoy. Others had simply disappeared, hiding in plain sight while they waited for their master to return. The wizard in Knockturn Alley was one of them. Harry was certain of it. He made a note of the man's face, his clothes, the shop he'd entered. Then he left the alley and returned to the bright safety of Diagon Alley, his mind racing with new possibilities and dangers. The Death Eaters were still out there. Still organized, still waiting. And now Harry knew what to look for. Muggle school was a strange experience. Harry had known it would be different, had prepared for the boredom of lessons far below his level, the social dynamics of children who had no idea what real problems looked like. But he hadn't prepared for how exhausting it would be to pretend. Every day, he had to carefully calibrate his performance. Smart enough to avoid suspicion, not so smart that teachers started asking questions. Friendly enough to deflect concern, not so friendly that anyone got too close. Average. Unremarkable. Forgettable. It was harder than any of the survival skills he'd developed at Privet Drive. The other children were a blur of simple thoughts and simple emotions, who was friends with whom, who had the best toys, who was going to get in trouble for not doing their homework. Harry could have manipulated any of them without effort, could have built himself a little kingdom of playground influence if he'd wanted to. He didn't want to. There was no point in ruling over children when the real game was being played elsewhere. But there was one student who caught his attention. Her name was Miranda Malfoy. She was 8 years old, with pale blonde hair and gray eyes that held a permanent edge of defiance. And according to the thoughts Harry caught from her teachers, she was a problem child, brilliant but difficult, prone to outbursts, unable or unwilling to fit in with her classmates. Harry recognized the type. He'd met it in the mirror. Miranda was a squib. He learned this not from her thoughts, she had surprisingly good mental discipline for a child her age, but from the context. The Malfoy name, the bitter references to a family that had sent her away, the way she flinched whenever magic was mentioned in storybooks or cartoons. She was Draco Malfoy's cousin. Her father was Lucius's younger brother, a minor functionary in the ministry who had produced the ultimate family embarrassment, a child without magic. Rather than face the shame of acknowledging her existence, the family had shuffled her off to the Muggle world, enrolled her in a school far from anyone who might make the connection, and pretended she didn't exist. Harry found her crying in the bathroom during lunch one day, and he made a choice. "They're idiots," he said, leaning against the doorframe. Miranda's head snapped up, tears still wet on her cheeks. "What? Your family. They're idiots. Throwing away someone valuable just because you don't fit their narrow definition of acceptable." Harry shrugged. "It's their loss. You don't know anything about my family." "I know more than you'd think." Harry walked over and sat down on the cold tile floor beside her, keeping a careful distance. "I know what it's like to be thrown away. To have people look at you and see only what you can't do, what you aren't, what you'll never be. I know how much it hurts." Miranda stared at him. Her thoughts were a chaos of suspicion and desperate hope, the hope of someone who had been alone for so long that any offer of understanding felt like a trap. "Who are you?" she whispered. "My name is Harry. And I think you and I might have a lot in common." He didn't push. He didn't try to read her deeply or manipulate her feelings. He just sat there, a small boy with messy hair and old clothes, offering something she'd never had before. Companionship. Understanding. The possibility that she wasn't as alone as she thought. It took 3 weeks before Miranda started talking to him willingly. 3 months before she trusted him enough to share her story. And by the end of the school year, Harry had something he'd never expected to find. A friend. Through Miranda, Harry learned about the Malfoys. Not the public face, the respectable pure-blood family, the generous philanthropists, the pillars of traditional wizarding society. The real Malfoys. The ones who gathered in Lucius's study after dark to toast the old days and whisper about the future. The ones who had sworn oaths to a dark lord and never stopped believing he would return. Miranda had been too young to understand most of what she'd seen and heard. But Harry's gift allowed him to pull details from her memories that she didn't consciously remember, faces, names, fragments of conversation that assembled into a picture of something vast and dangerous. The Death Eaters weren't just a scattered collection of former terrorists. They were a network. A shadow government waiting in the wings, with connections in the Ministry, in Gringotts, in Hogwarts itself. And at the center of the web sat Lucius Malfoy, patient and calculating, pulling strings that reached into every corner of magical Britain. Harry shared none of this with Miranda. She was his friend, his first real friend, and he refused to treat her as a source to be exploited. But he listened when she talked about her family, and he remembered everything. When Miranda's birthday arrived, Harry gave her a book about astronomy that he'd found in a Muggle shop. It was beautiful, full of photographs of galaxies and nebulae, with text that explained how stars were born and died over billions of years. "Why this?" she asked, tracing the cover with her fingers. "Because you're not just a Malfoy," Harry said. "You're not just a squib. You're a person who can look at the universe and understand it, with or without magic. And I wanted you to have something that reminded you of that." Miranda didn't cry, but it was a near thing. "You're very strange, Harry Potter," she said. Harry smiled. "I know. But I'm also very loyal. And I don't forget my friends." It was, he thought later, the most honest thing he'd said in years. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry was eating breakfast, a single piece of toast, carefully retrieved before Dudley could claim it, when the owl swooped through the kitchen window and dropped a cream-colored envelope directly into his lap. The Dursleys froze, their faces cycling through shock and horror and the desperate hope that this wasn't what it obviously was. But it was. The envelope bore a crest Harry recognized from his research, a shield divided into 4 quarters, each containing a different animal. Lion, serpent, badger, eagle. Hogwarts. "Give that here," Vernon growled, reaching across the table. "No." The single word stopped Vernon cold. Harry looked up at his uncle, meeting his eyes for the first time in months, and let a little of what he really was show through. "This letter is addressed to me," Harry said quietly. "It is my property. You have no legal right to take it, and if you try, I will make certain that the consequences are significant." Vernon's face purpled. Petunia had gone white. Dudley was staring at Harry like he'd never seen him before. "You can't threaten me in my own house, boy." "I'm not threatening you, Uncle Vernon. I'm informing you of facts." Harry stood, the letter clutched in his hand. "The magical world knows I exist. They know where I live. And if I don't respond to this letter in the expected way, they will come looking for me. When they do, they'll find a child who's been starved and beaten and locked in a cupboard for 7 years. What do you think will happen then?" The silence stretched. "I'll be in my cupboard," Harry said. "Reading my mail." He walked out of the kitchen without looking back. The letter was what he'd expected, an invitation to attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, complete with a list of required supplies and instructions for accessing Diagon Alley. But there was a second letter in the envelope, written on different paper in an elegant, flowing script. "Dear Mr. Potter, I am pleased to learn that you will be joining us at Hogwarts in September. However, I must confess to some surprise at the circumstances of your invitation. It has come to my attention that you have been in contact with Gringotts for some time, and that you have demonstrated a level of independence and awareness unusual for a child your age. I would very much like to discuss these matters with you in person, at your earliest convenience. Please be assured that your safety and well-being are my highest concerns. Whatever may have transpired in your years with the Dursleys, I hope you will believe that I have always acted in what I believe to be your best interests. Yours sincerely, Albus Dumbledore, Headmaster, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." Harry read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and tucked it into his pocket. Dumbledore knew. Not everything, probably not about his legilimency, but enough to be concerned. Enough to want a meeting, to take Harry's measure, to figure out what kind of chess piece he was dealing with. Harry smiled. Good, he thought. Let's see who's better at this game. 3 days later, another letter arrived. This one bore a different crest, a silver serpent coiled around a wand, and the handwriting was precise rather than flowing. Harry opened it in the privacy of Mrs. Figg's parlor, his shields tight against her curious thoughts. Dear Mr. Potter, I write on behalf of the Hogwarts Board of Governors to extend a special invitation. As a member of one of Britain's oldest wizarding families, you hold a unique position in our society, one that comes with both privileges and responsibilities. I would be honored if you would visit my home this Saturday to discuss your upcoming education and the role you might play in shaping the future of magical Britain. A formal introduction to wizarding society would, I believe, be beneficial to a young man who has been deprived of proper guidance for so long. Please respond at your convenience. My house elf will await your owl. With respect, Lucius Malfoy, member, Hogwarts Board of Governors. Harry stared at the letter. His mind was already racing through possibilities, the opportunity to see the Malfoys up close, to read Lucius's thoughts, to understand the shape of the enemy he would someday have to face. But there was also danger. Lucius was clever, connected, and ruthless. Walking into his home was like walking into a dragon's den. Harry thought about it for less than a minute. Then he picked up a quill and wrote his acceptance. Malfoy Manor was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. The estate sprawled across hundreds of acres of manicured grounds, all wrought iron gates and ancient trees and magic so thick it pressed against Harry's senses like fog. The manor house itself was a Georgian masterpiece, all white stone and tall windows, with peacocks strutting across the lawn like they owned the place. Harry arrived by goblin escort, Ironclaw had insisted, and Harry hadn't argued. Having a Gringotts representative at his side sent a message, the Potter heir had allies, resources, options. He wasn't a helpless orphan to be patronized and manipulated. Lucius Malfoy met them in the entrance hall. He was exactly what Harry had expected, tall, pale, aristocratic, with long white blonde hair and cold grey eyes that missed nothing. His mind was a fortress, professional acclimacy, layered and complex, revealing only what he wanted to reveal. But Harry didn't need to read his thoughts to understand him. The body language, the careful positioning, the slight curl of the lip when he looked at Ironclaw, all of it told a story. Lucius Malfoy was a man who believed absolutely in his own superiority, and who resented having to play politics with creatures he considered beneath him. Mr. Potter. Lucius's voice was silk over steel. Welcome to my home. I trust your journey was comfortable. Very comfortable, thank you. Harry kept his expression pleasant and his shields impenetrable. Your invitation was unexpected. I wasn't aware the Board of Governors took such personal interest in incoming students. A flicker of something, surprise. Respect, crossed Lucius's face before the mask reasserted itself. You are not an ordinary student, Mr. Potter. Surely you know that by now. I know a lot of things, Mr. Malfoy. I'm always eager to learn more. They adjourned to a sitting room that probably cost more than the Dursleys' entire house. Narcissa Malfoy joined them, elegant and cold, her thoughts a carefully maintained blend of social pleasantries and razor-sharp assessment. And in the corner, trying very hard to look uninterested, sat a boy about Harry's age with white blonde hair and his father's eyes. Draco Malfoy. Miranda's cousin. The heir to everything Harry was here to understand. Tea. Narcissa offered, her voice musical. Please. Harry accepted a cup and took a careful sip, extending his senses to check for potions or enchantments. Clean. They wanted him comfortable, not drugged. I'll come directly to the point, Mr. Potter. Lucius settled into a chair across from him, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. You have been raised in the Muggle world, deprived of your heritage and your rightful place in our society. This is a tragedy that I, and many others, deeply regret. A tragedy that could have been prevented, Harry observed, if someone had intervened earlier. Indeed. But the headmaster was quite insistent that you remain with your Muggle relatives. Something about protection, I believe. Lucius's tone made it clear what he thought of that excuse. Blood wards, Harry said. My mother's sacrifice. Dumbledore believed it was the only way to keep me safe from Voldemort's followers. The temperature in the room dropped. Narcissa's hand trembled slightly. Draco's eyes went wide. You know that name, Lucius said, after a long moment. I know a lot of things. Harry met Lucius's gaze steadily. I know that many of Voldemort's followers escaped justice after the war. I know that some of them claimed the Imperius defense, despite evidence to the contrary. And I know that the boy who lived is a symbol that many would like to influence. Lucius's expression didn't change, but his thoughts, what Harry could sense of them, churned with sudden calculation. You are remarkably well informed for an 8-year-old. I'm remarkably well informed for anyone. Harry set down his teacup. Let's dispense with the pleasantries, Mr. Malfoy. You didn't invite me here out of concern for my education. You want to know what I am, what I know, and whether I can be useful to your goals. So let me save us both some time. He stood, ignoring the surprised looks from everyone in the room. I am the Potter heir, the boy who lived, and the holder of a Wisengamot seat. I have resources, allies, and information that you can't even imagine. I am not a chess piece to be moved around by anyone, not Dumbledore, not the Ministry, and not you. Harry turned to face Lucius directly. But I'm also not your enemy. Not yet. I have no interest in refighting the last war or avenging my parents' deaths on everyone who wore a dark mark. What I want is knowledge, influence, and the freedom to make my own choices. If you can help me achieve those things, we might be able to work together. If you try to manipulate or control me. He let the sentence hang. Lucius stared at him. For once, his occlumency wasn't quite enough to hide his reaction. Harry caught a flash of genuine shock, followed by something that might have been respect. You are not what I expected, Mr. Potter. I rarely am. Harry glanced at Draco, who was staring at him with an expression of fascinated horror. Your son seems interesting. We should talk sometime, Draco. I suspect we have more in common than either of us realizes. Draco opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I believe that concludes our meeting. Harry turned back to Lucius. Thank you for the tea, Mr. Malfoy. I'll show myself out. He walked toward the door, Ironclaw falling into step beside him. He was 3 steps from the threshold when Lucius's voice stopped him. Mr. Potter. Harry turned. Lucius was standing now, his face unreadable. You mentioned that you're not my enemy yet. What would it take to keep things that way? Harry considered the question. 1,000 possible answers ran through his mind, demands, threats, bargains that could be struck. In the end, he chose honesty. Stop serving a dead man, he said. Whatever Voldemort promised you, whatever you think his return will bring, it's not worth it. I've seen what happens to people who make deals with monsters. I've lived with the consequences every day of my life. He paused at the door. You have a son, Mr. Malfoy. A wife. A legacy. Ask yourself what matters more, power you might never gain, or the family you already have. He left without waiting for an answer. The carriage ride back to London was quiet. Ironclaw sat across from Harry, his alien features unreadable. Finally, when Malfoy Manor had disappeared behind them, the goblin spoke. That was either very brave or very foolish. Maybe both. Harry leaned back against the cushions, suddenly exhausted. I couldn't let him think I was easy prey. Whatever game he's playing, I needed to establish myself as a player, not a piece. You did more than that. You challenged him. Threatened him. In his own home, with his wife and son watching. I know. He will not forget this. I know that too. Harry stared out the window at the passing countryside. But I meant what I said. I don't want to be his enemy. I've seen enough ugliness in people's minds to know that hate just breeds more hate. If there's a chance to break the cycle, to show Lucius a different path, I have to take it. Ironclaw was silent for a long moment. You are a strange child, Harry Potter. So everyone keeps telling me. In the goblin tongue, there is a word for someone like you. Someone who sees clearly, who speaks truth to power, who refuses to bend even when breaking would be easier. The goblin's thin lips twitched. We call them Ragnarok. It means, one who walks through fire. Harry looked at him. Is that a compliment? It is an observation. Ironclaw's eyes glittered. The Firewalkers are dangerous people, Mr. Potter. They change the world around them, whether the world wants to change or not. Most of them die young. And the ones who survive? The goblin smiled. They become legends. Dumbledore's meeting was everything Lucius's meeting had not been. The headmaster arrived at Privet Drive in person, a tall figure in robes of deep purple, with a long white beard and half-moon spectacles that twinkled in the afternoon light. The Dursleys fled at the sight of him, retreating to their bedroom and refusing to come out. Harry met him in the living room, sitting in Vernon's favorite armchair like he belonged there. Mr. Potter. Dumbledore's voice was warm, grandfatherly. His mind was something else entirely, vast and complex and shielded by a clemency so powerful that Harry could barely sense its edges. It is a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Professor Dumbledore. Harry gestured to the couch. Please, sit down. We have a lot to discuss. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours. They talked about Harry's childhood, carefully edited to reveal the abuse without exposing his abilities. They talked about the magical world, about Hogwarts, about the war that had shaped both their lives. And eventually, inevitably, they talked about Voldemort. He will return, Dumbledore said. His eyes were no longer twinkling. I do not know when or how, but Tom Riddle is not dead. The prophecy ensured that your fates are bound together, and until that bond is broken, neither of you can truly rest. The prophecy. Harry had been waiting for this. I know it exists. I know it concerns me. But I don't know what it says. Dumbledore hesitated. For the first time, a crack appeared in his carefully maintained composure. The prophecy speaks of a child born at the end of July, to parents who had defied Voldemort 3 times. It says that this child will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and that one must die at the hand of the other. Harry absorbed this. Power the Dark Lord knows not. His legilimency, perhaps. Or something else, something he hadn't discovered yet. You've known this since before I was born, he said quietly. You've been preparing me for this fight my entire life. I have been trying to keep you safe, you've been keeping me ignorant. There's a difference. Dumbledore flinched. It was a small thing, almost invisible, but Harry caught it. I have made mistakes, Harry. Many of them. Leaving you with the Dursleys, failing to check on your welfare, allowing myself to believe that the blood wards were enough. The old man's voice was heavy with regret. But I have always wanted what was best for you. Please believe that. Harry looked at him, really looked, pushing against those formidable shields with everything he had. And for just a moment, the barriers cracked, and he saw what lay beneath. Guilt. Genuine, crushing guilt. Dumbledore had known what Harry was suffering, had chosen to leave him there anyway, and the weight of that choice had been eating at him for years. He wasn't evil. He wasn't even cold. He was just a man who had made terrible decisions for what he believed were good reasons, and who was finally being forced to confront the consequences. Harry pulled back. The crack sealed itself, and Dumbledore's eyes sharpened with sudden awareness. You felt that the headmaster said slowly. You pushed against my occlumency. That should not be possible for a child your age. Harry said nothing. What are you, Harry Potter? It was the same question Ironclaw had asked. The same question Lucius had implied. The question that would define his entire life if he let it. Harry stood. I'm someone who sees clearly, he said. Someone who won't be manipulated or controlled. And someone who will make his own decisions about his own destiny. He walked to the door, then paused. Thank you for coming, Professor. I look forward to attending your school. But understand this, I will never be your weapon. Whatever the prophecy says, whatever role you've planned for me in your war, I will choose my own path. And if anyone tries to stop me. He let the sentence hang. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. I think, the old man said, that Hogwarts is going to be very interesting this year. The summer ended with a letter from Miranda. Dear Harry, Father says I have to go away to school. Not a magical school, obviously, just some boring Muggle boarding school where I won't embarrass the family with my existence. I'm writing to say goodbye, I suppose. I doubt we'll see each other again. Thank you for being my friend. You're the only person who ever made me feel like I wasn't broken. Harry read the letter in his cupboard, by the light of a candle he'd stolen from the kitchen. His heart ached with a sadness he hadn't expected, the loss of something precious that he'd barely begun to understand. But beneath the sadness was something else. Something harder. The Malfoys thought they could throw people away. They thought blood purity and magical power were all that mattered, that anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of valuable was worthless. They were wrong. And someday, Harry was going to prove it. He wrote back, Dear Miranda, you're not broken. You're not worthless. And this isn't goodbye, it's just a pause. I'm going to Hogwarts in September. I'm going to learn everything I can about magic and politics and how the world really works. And when I'm done, I'm going to change things. For people like us. For everyone who's ever been thrown away. Wait for me. I won't forget you. He sent the letter with a borrowed owl and watched it disappear into the night sky. Then he turned back to his preparations. September was coming. Hogwarts was waiting. And Harry Potter, the boy who could see into minds, who had survived the unsurvivable, who refused to be anyone's pawn, was ready to begin the next chapter of his story. The cupboard under the stairs was dark and cramped and cold. But for the first time in his life, Harry wasn't afraid. He was excited. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Weight of Secrets. The Ministry of Magic smelled like parchment and old magic and barely concealed desperation. Harry stood in the atrium, surrounded by witches and wizards rushing to their morning appointments, and let the wash of thoughts flow over him like water. Most were mundane, complaints about workloads, gossip about colleagues, the universal human preoccupation with petty grievances. But beneath the surface noise, patterns emerged. Fear. Uncertainty. The collective anxiety of a society that had never truly recovered from the war it pretended was over. Lucius Malfoy stood beside him, immaculate in robes of charcoal gray, his expression one of cultivated boredom. It had been 3 weeks since their first meeting, and the relationship had evolved into something Harry could only describe as wary mutual interest. Lucius wanted to understand him. Harry wanted access to information. Neither trusted the other, but both recognized the value of temporary alliance. The Wisingamot chambers are on level 10, Lucius said, guiding Harry toward the lifts. As holder of the Potter seat, you have the right to observe sessions, though you cannot vote until you come of age. Observe. Harry smiled faintly. That's what I do best. The lift descended through the ministry's maze of departments, and at each level, Harry's awareness expanded. He sensed the harried minds of the magical law enforcement offices, the paranoid alertness of the Auror headquarters, the peculiar blankness that surrounded the Department of Mysteries. That last caught his attention, a void in the mental landscape, as if the entire floor had been wrapped in occlumency shields. The unspeakables, Lucius murmured, noticing Harry's interest. They research magic too dangerous for common knowledge. Even I don't know what happens down there. Interesting, Harry thought. A department full of secrets, shielded from even casual legilimency. Something to investigate later. The Wisengamot chamber was a vast circular room, ringed with tiered benches that rose toward a domed ceiling painted with scenes of magical history. Witches and wizards in plum-colored robes were taking their seats, and at the center of the room, raised on a platform of black marble, sat the chief warlock's chair. Currently occupied by Albus Dumbledore. Their eyes met across the chamber. Dumbledore's expression revealed nothing, but Harry caught a flicker of something through those formidable shields, curiosity, perhaps, or concern. The old man hadn't expected to see him here, arm in arm with Lucius Malfoy. Good, Harry thought. Let him wonder. The Potter's seat is there. Lucius indicated a bench in the middle tier, positioned between families Harry recognized from his research, the Longbottoms on one side, the Greengrasses on the other. I'll leave you to observe. We'll speak afterward. Harry climbed to his seat, ignoring the whispers that followed him. The boy who lived, attending a Wisengamot session at age 9. It was unprecedented, and the magical world loved nothing more than precedents to gossip about. The session itself was tedious, budget allocations, minor regulatory disputes, the kind of bureaucratic machinery that kept any government running. But Harry wasn't here for the official business. He was here to read minds. Over the next 3 hours, he methodically worked his way through every member of the Wisengamot. Most were exactly what they appeared, politicians of varying competence, motivated by the usual mix of ambition, ideology, and self-interest. But a few stood out. Augusta Longbottom, the formidable grandmother of a boy named Neville, whose thoughts burned with a cold fury directed at anyone she suspected of Death Eater sympathies. She would be an ally, Harry decided, if he approached her correctly. Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, whose mind was a model of disciplined integrity. She actually believed in justice, in the rule of law, in protecting the innocent. Harry had never encountered anyone like her. And then there was Cornelius Fudge. The Minister for Magic sat in a place of honor near Dumbledore, his bowler hat clutched nervously in his hands, his thoughts a constant stream of anxiety and political calculation. He wasn't evil, Harry could see that clearly. He was just weak. A man who had risen to power through connections and compromise, who maintained his position by never making difficult decisions, who feared change more than he feared injustice. Fudge's mind was an open book, and what Harry read there made him uneasy. The minister was terrified of Dumbledore's influence, resentful of anyone who might threaten his authority, and pathetically eager to please whoever seemed most powerful at any given moment. Right now, that meant Lucius Malfoy, who had been quietly cultivating Fudge's dependence through a combination of flattery, donations, and carefully managed crises. The Death Eaters didn't need to control the ministry openly. They just needed to control the man who controlled the ministry. Harry filed the information away and kept reading. Afterward, Lucius took him to lunch at a private club near Diagon Alley. The establishment was clearly designed for the wizarding elite: crystal chandeliers, velvet upholstery, house elves in immaculate pillowcases serving dishes that probably cost more than the Dursleys' monthly grocery budget. Harry ate carefully, aware that every bite was being watched and judged. "You were very attentive during the session," Lucius observed, swirling wine in a goblet of cut crystal. "Most children your age would have been bored senseless. I found it educational." "Did you?" Lucius's gray eyes were sharp. "And what did you learn?" Harry considered his answer. This was a test, he knew, one of many that Lucius had been administering since their first meeting. The question was how much to reveal. "I learned that the minister is weak," he said finally. "That Dumbledore's influence is waning but still substantial. That at least a third of the Wisengamot would support reforms if someone gave them cover to vote for them. And that the Department of Mysteries is hiding something significant, though I have no idea what. Lucius's eyebrows rose. That's remarkably comprehensive. I told you. I pay attention. Indeed you do. The older wizard leaned back, studying Harry with new interest. You know, when you first came to my home, I thought you were simply precocious. A clever child who had somehow educated himself beyond his years. But it's more than that, isn't it? You see things that others don't. Harry said nothing. The Dark Lord had a similar gift, Lucius continued, his voice dropping. He could look at a person and know their secrets, their fears, their desires. It made him compelling. People would follow him to their deaths because he understood them better than they understood themselves. I'm not Voldemort. No. You're not. Lucius's expression was unreadable. But you could be, couldn't you? If you chose to. You have the same power, the same potential. The only question is what you'll do with it. Harry met his gaze steadily. What would you do, Mr. Malfoy? If you could see into people's minds, know their every thought and secret, would you use it to control them? To dominate? Or would you use it to understand them, to find common ground, to build something better than what came before? Lucius was silent for a long moment. I think, he said finally, that's a question everyone must answer for themselves. Then let me answer it for you. Harry set down his fork. I won't be a Dark Lord. I won't rule through fear or manipulation or violence. But I won't be a pawn either, not yours, not Dumbledore's, not anyone's. I'm going to change the wizarding world, Mr. Malfoy. The only question is whether you'll be helping me or standing in my way. The challenge hung in the air between them. Then, slowly, Lucius smiled. You really are extraordinary, he said. I can see why the goblins find you so interesting. The goblins are practical. They recognize potential when they see it. As do I. Lucius raised his goblet. To potential, then. And to the interesting times ahead. Harry picked up his own glass, water, not wine, and returned the toast. Neither of them believed for a moment that they were really allies. But for now, the pretense served both their purposes. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Harry had returned to Mrs. Figg's house, his unofficial headquarters in the Muggle world, when he felt the approach of a magical mind. Powerful, disciplined, and carrying a weight of sorrow that pressed against his senses like a physical force. Severus Snape. Harry had read about him in Mrs. Figg's memories, in fragments pulled from Arabella's reports to the Order. A former Death Eater turned spy, now teaching potions at Hogwarts. A man who had loved Harry's mother, hated Harry's father, and carried that twisted history like a wound that never healed. He opened the door before Snape could knock. Professor Snape. Harry kept his voice neutral. I wasn't expecting you. The man who stood on Mrs. Figg's doorstep was exactly what Harry had imagined, tall, thin, dressed in black robes that seemed to absorb the afternoon light. His face was sallow and hook-nosed, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that made Harry's scar tingle faintly. Potter. Snape's voice was silk over broken glass. The headmaster sent me to assess you. Assess me? Your recent activities have caused concern. Visiting Gringotts, meeting with Lucius Malfoy, attending Wizengamot sessions, Snape's lip curled. You've been very busy for a child not yet 10 years old. Harry stepped back from the door. Please, come in. Mrs. Figg is out, but I can offer tea. Snape swept past him into the cluttered living room, his robes billowing dramatically. Harry closed the door and took a moment to center himself, reinforcing his shields. This man was dangerous, a skilled Legilimens in his own right, and one who would recognize the signs of mind-reading if Harry wasn't careful. The headmaster is concerned, Snape said, settling into an armchair with obvious distaste for its worn upholstery. He believes you may be vulnerable to manipulation by certain parties. You mean Lucius Malfoy? Among others. Snape's dark eyes bored into Harry's. The Dark Lord had many followers, Potter. Not all of them are as obvious as the ones we caught. Some hide in plain sight, waiting for their moment. And a boy who appears to be positioning himself as a political player, is either an asset or a threat, Harry finished. Depending on whose side he's on. Snape's expression flickered. You're not what I expected. People keep saying that. I knew your father. Arrogant, bullying, convinced of his own superiority. The bitterness in Snape's voice was palpable. I expected his son to be the same. A pampered prince, raised on stories of his own heroism, eager to ride his fame into whatever position he desired. My father has been dead for 8 years. I was raised by people who despised me. Harry met Snape's gaze without flinching. Whatever I am, Professor, I made myself. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Harry could feel Snape's mind pressing against his shields, not attacking, just testing, probing for weaknesses. He let it happen, careful to show only what he wanted shown: intelligence, determination, a carefully cultivated appearance of ordinary magical ability. You have your mother's eyes, Snape said finally, and there was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Something raw and wounded. So I've been told. She was remarkable. The brightest witch of her generation, and not just in academics. She had a gift for seeing the good in people, even people who didn't deserve it. Snape's jaw tightened. She saw good in me, once. I repaid her by. He stopped abruptly, as if catching himself before a confession. I know about you and my mother, Harry said quietly. I know you were friends when you were young. I know you made choices that drove you apart. And I know you've spent the last 8 years trying to atone for those choices. Snape's face went white. How could you possibly? I told you, Professor. I pay attention. Harry leaned forward. I'm not going to judge you for what you did before I was born. I'm not going to hate you because you hated my father. But I need you to understand something. He let a little of his power show, just enough to make his eyes seem to glow faintly in the dim room. I am not my father. I am not my mother. I am something new, something that's never existed before. And whatever game the headmaster and the Death Eaters are playing, I'm not a piece on their board. I'm a player. Snape stared at him. His occlumency was excellent, but Harry could still catch flickers of emotion leaking through: shock, fear, and beneath it all, something that might have been hope. You really could change things, Snape whispered. You have the power, the intelligence, the ruthlessness. You could tear down everything the Dark Lord built, everything his followers are still trying to preserve. Yes. Or you could become something worse. Something that makes the Dark Lord look like a minor inconvenience. Also yes. Harry smiled, but there was no warmth in it. That's why I'm being very careful about the choices I make. Every decision matters, Professor. Every ally I choose, every enemy I create, every secret I keep or reveal, it all shapes who I'm becoming. He stood. Tell Dumbledore that I'm not his enemy. Tell him I intend to attend Hogwarts, to learn everything I can, to use my position for good rather than evil. But also tell him this: if he tries to manipulate me, to use me as a weapon in his war, I will know. And I will respond accordingly. Snape rose slowly, his dark robes rustling. And if I choose not to deliver your message? Then I'll find another way to communicate it. Harry walked to the door and opened it. Thank you for visiting, Professor. I look forward to your classes. Snape paused at the threshold, his expression unreadable. You're playing a dangerous game, Potter. The forces arrayed against you are considerable. I know. Harry met his eyes. But I have advantages they don't expect. And I have something else, something the Dark Lord never had. What's that? I actually care about people. Harry smiled. It's amazing how much that changes the equation. Snape left without another word. But Harry caught the final thought that escaped his shields, unguarded and raw. Lily would have been proud of him. The ethics of reading minds had been troubling Harry for months. It had started as a simple question of survival. Knowing what the Dursleys were thinking had kept him alive, had allowed him to anticipate their cruelty and minimize the damage. But as his power grew, as his reach expanded, the moral implications became harder to ignore. Every mind he read without consent was a violation. Every secret he learned was stolen property. Every decision he made based on information others hadn't chosen to share was, in some fundamental sense, cheating. And yet, he remembered the Auror whose mind he'd read at the Ministry. The man planning to murder his wife. Harry had tipped off Amelia Bones, anonymously, and the Auror had been arrested before he could act. A life saved because Harry had violated someone's mental privacy. Did the ends justify the means? If he could prevent suffering by reading minds, was he morally obligated to do so? And if he wasn't obligated to read minds, was he complicit in the suffering he could have prevented? These questions kept him awake at night, lying in the cupboard that had been his home for so long. The answers never came easily. In late July, Harry made a decision that would shape everything that followed. He went to see Augusta Longbottom. The Longbottom estate was old money, not as flashy as Malfoy Manor, but solid, respectable, steeped in centuries of tradition. Harry arrived by Flo, a magical travel network he'd learned about from Ironclaw, and was met by a house elf who led him to a sitting room where Augusta waited, her vulture-topped hat as intimidating as her reputation suggested. "Mr. Potter." Her voice was clipped, aristocratic. "I confess I was surprised by your request for an audience." "I imagine you were." Harry took the seat she indicated, positioning himself carefully. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. You're the boy who lived." It would have been rude to refuse. Augusta's eyes, sharp as chips of flint, studied him openly. "Though I notice you didn't use that title in your letter." "Just, Harry Potter, wishing to discuss matters of mutual interest. The title isn't mine. It's something other people created. I'm more interested in what I can build myself." Augusta's lips twitched. A refreshing perspective. Most children your age would be milking that fame for everything it's worth. Most children my age haven't learned what I've learned. Harry met her gaze directly. About the war, about the Death Eaters, about the people who are still working to bring Voldemort back. The name made Augusta flinch, but she recovered quickly. "You speak of things you cannot possibly understand. With respect, Madame Longbottom, I understand more than you know." Harry leaned forward. "I know what happened to your son and daughter-in-law. I know they were tortured to insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange and her associates. I know they're still alive, still in St. Mungo's, still trapped in minds that will never heal." Augusta's face had gone pale. "How dare you? I'm not here to cause pain. I'm here to offer something." Harry's voice was steady. "I know that Neville is your heir. I know you've raised him, tried to shape him into what his father was. I know you fear that he's not strong enough, not brave enough, not magical enough to carry on the family legacy. You know nothing about my grandson. I know he's 11 years old and terrified of disappointing you. I know he has more courage than anyone gives him credit for, buried under years of being told he's not good enough. And I know that if someone believed in him, really believed, without conditions or expectations, he could become something extraordinary." Augusta stared at him. Her acclimacy was minimal, and Harry could read her confusion clearly. Who was this child? How did he know these things? What did he want? "I'm not offering charity," Harry continued. "I'm offering alliance. The Potters and Longbottoms have been allies for generations. Our families fought together against Grindelwald, against Voldemort, against every threat that emerged. I want to rebuild that alliance, not just as a political arrangement, but as a genuine partnership. And what would I get in return? A friend for Neville. Someone his own age who will treat him as an equal, who will help him discover his own strength instead of measuring him against his father's shadow. Harry paused. And information. I have access to sources that you don't. I hear things that others miss. If there are threats moving against the Longbottom family, I'll warn you. Augusta was silent for a long time. Harry waited, watching the calculations play out behind her eyes. You're asking me to trust a child I've never met, she said finally. To believe that a 9-year-old raised by Muggles somehow has the insight and resources to offer the noble house of Longbottom an alliance of equals. I'm asking you to consider the possibility. Harry stood. I won't pressure you for an answer now. But when Neville arrives at Hogwarts in September, I hope you'll let him make his own decision about whether to be my friend. He walked to the fireplace, reaching for the Floop powder. Mr. Potter. Harry turned. Augusta's expression had softened slightly. My son. Frank. Before the war, he spoke of James Potter often. Said he was the best friend a man could have. Loyal to a fault, brave beyond reason. I've heard similar things. I see something of James in you. Augusta's voice was thoughtful. But I also see something else. Something harder. Something that James never had. What's that? Calculation. Augusta met his eyes. You're not driven by emotion, are you? Not by loyalty or bravery or any of the noble sentiments that motivated your father. You think 3 moves ahead, you measure costs and benefits, you make decisions based on strategy rather than impulse. Harry considered denying it. Instead, he chose honesty. I was raised without love, Madame Longbottom. Without kindness, without protection, without any of the things that teach children to trust in the goodness of the world. I learned very early that sentiment is a luxury, and that survival requires clarity of thought. And yet you're here, offering alliance and friendship, talking about believing in people and helping them grow. Yes. Why? Harry smiled, and for once it reached his eyes. Because I refuse to let my childhood define my future. I was raised without love, but that doesn't mean I can't learn to give it. I was taught that the world is cruel, but that doesn't mean I can't try to make it better. He paused. I have every reason to become a monster, Madame Longbottom. Every excuse, every justification. But I've decided to become something else instead. And that choice, that deliberate, calculated decision to be good when evil would be so much easier, is the most important thing about me. He stepped into the fireplace. Think about what I've said. I'll see Neville at Hogwarts. Green flames swallowed him whole. August brought crisis. It started with a message from Ironclaw, a brief, encrypted note warning that someone had been making inquiries about Harry's finances. Not official inquiries, not ministry audits, but quiet questions asked in the wrong places by people who knew how to avoid notice. The faithful were moving. Harry had been tracking the Shadow Network for months, piecing together fragments from the minds of people he encountered. He knew they existed, knew they were organized, knew they were waiting for Voldemort's return. But until now, they had seemed content to watch and wait, gathering resources and building influence without drawing attention. Something had changed. Something had made them take notice of Harry Potter. He spent 3 days strengthening his defenses, new wards on Mrs. Figg's house, additional security measures on his Gringotts accounts, emergency protocols with Ironclaw in case everything went wrong. Then he did something reckless. He went looking for them. The wizard he'd spotted in Nocturne Alley, the one with the void where his thoughts should be, had been visiting the same shop every week. Harry had tracked his pattern, learned his schedule, and on the first Thursday of August, he was waiting. The shop sold dark artifacts. Cursed objects, forbidden texts, things that had been illegal since before Harry was born. The proprietor was a wizened man named Borgin who radiated greed and fear in equal measure, his thoughts focused entirely on profit and survival. Harry entered under a heavy glamour, appearing as an ordinary teenage wizard in shabby robes. Borgin barely glanced at him. help you?" The shopkeeper's voice was oily. "Just browsing." Harry wandered through the dusty shelves, pretending to examine cursed necklaces and venomous candelabras while his mind reached outward, searching for the distinctive void he'd sensed before. There. In the back room. The faithful operative was meeting with someone, their conversation hidden behind doors of ancient oak. Harry couldn't read through the doors, too many wards, too much protection. But he could wait. 20 minutes later, the operative emerged. Middle-aged, forgettable, his surface thoughts bland as oatmeal. But this time, Harry was prepared. He'd learned new techniques from books he'd found in his family vault, methods for reading the spaces between thoughts, the emotional resonances that occlumency couldn't entirely conceal. The void was there, but it wasn't perfect. Cracks showed through. And in those cracks, Harry caught glimpses of something vast and terrifying. A network spanning continents. Cells in Britain, France, Germany, America, everywhere the wizarding world extended. Communications channels that used methods Harry didn't recognize. And at the center of it all, a figure called the Architect, whose identity was hidden even from most of his own followers. But one name surfaced clearly, attached to a sense of reverence and fear that made Harry's stomach clench. Augustus Rookwood. The operative left the shop, and Harry followed at a distance, his glamour firmly in place. They walked through nocturne alleys, winding streets, past establishments that catered to darker tastes, until the operative reached a dead end and opposite away. Harry stood alone in the dirty alleyway, processing what he'd learned. The faithful weren't just waiting for Voldemort. They were actively working to prepare for his return, building infrastructure, gathering resources, placing agents in positions of power. And they were led by a man who had been an unspeakable, a researcher in the Department of Mysteries, with access to secrets that Harry couldn't even imagine. He needed more information. He needed allies. And he needed to be very, very careful. The confrontation came 3 days later. Harry was walking through Diagon Alley, heading toward Gringotts for his weekly meeting with Ironclaw, when he felt it, a subtle pressure against his shields, probing, testing. Someone was trying to read his mind. He stopped in the middle of the street, ignoring the flow of shoppers around him, and turned slowly. A woman stood 20 feet away. Middle-aged, unremarkable, dressed in robes that blended perfectly with the crowd. But her eyes were wrong, too focused, too intent, fixed on Harry with an intensity that made his scar throb. "You've been looking for us," she said. Her voice carried perfectly despite the noise of the street. The Architect would like to know why. Harry's heart rate spiked, but he kept his expression calm. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're not the only one who can read people, Mr. Potter. We've been watching you for months. We know about your visits to Gringotts, your meetings with the Malfoys, your alliance with the Longbottom woman. We know you're building something. And you want to know if I'm building it for you or against you. We want to know what you are." The woman took a step closer, and the crowd seemed to part around her without noticing. "A natural Legilimens, powerful enough to crack occlumency that's held for decades. That's rare, Mr. Potter. Rare enough to be valuable. I'm not interested in being valuable to people who serve a monster. The Dark Lord is not a monster. He's a visionary." The woman's voice hardened. He saw what the wizarding world could become, unified, pure, freed from the corruption of Muggle influence. He was building something beautiful before your mother's sacrifice destroyed everything. My mother gave her life to protect me from a murderer. That's not sacrifice, that's heroism. Your mother was a mudblood who interfered with forces she didn't understand. The woman's smile was gone now, replaced by something cold and fanatical. But you're different. Pure magical blood, extraordinary gifts, raised outside the propaganda that poisons most children's minds. You could be one of us, Mr. Potter. You could help us finish what the Dark Lord started. Harry felt the woman's mind pressing against his shields again, harder this time, searching for weaknesses. He let her push, let her feel the smooth blankness of his acclimacy, let her think she was making progress. Then he pushed back. The woman staggered. For just a moment, her shields cracked, and Harry saw what lay beneath: decades of service to Voldemort's cause, crimes that would guarantee a lifetime in Azkaban, and a burning devotion that bordered on religious fervor. He also saw something else. A location. A meeting place. The address of a house in London where the faithful gathered to plan their master's return. Harry pulled back before the woman could realize what he'd taken. "Tell your architect that I'm not interested," he said, his voice steady. "I don't serve monsters, and I don't join cults. If he has something to say to me, he can say it himself. Otherwise, stay away from me and everyone I care about." He turned and walked toward Gringotts, feeling the woman's eyes on his back. Behind him, he heard her voice, soft but clear, "This isn't over, Mr. Potter. The architect will have his answer." Harry didn't look back. He told Ironclaw everything. The goblin listened without interrupting, his sharp eyes flickering with calculations that Harry couldn't follow. When Harry finished, Ironclaw was silent for a long moment. "You've made powerful enemies," he said finally. "I've had powerful enemies since I was 1 year old. At least now I know who they are. You know some of them. The faithful are vast, Mr. Potter. Cells that don't know each other, bound only by ideology and the promise of the Dark Lord's return. You've glimpsed one corner of a very large tapestry. Then I need to see more." Harry leaned forward. "The address I pulled from her mind, can Gringotts help me investigate it?" Ironclaw's expression was carefully neutral. "Gringotts does not involve itself in wizarding politics. This isn't politics. It's survival. If the faithful are moving against me, I need to know why. I need to understand what they're planning. And if your investigation reveals information that the Ministry would want, that Dumbledore would want, what then?" Harry considered the question. "Then I decide what to do with it based on what's best for me and the people I care about. Not what's best for any institution or faction." Ironclaw studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. "You really are a firewalker, Mr. Potter." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a piece of parchment. "I cannot officially assist you in this matter. But I can tell you that Goblin intelligence has been tracking certain movements in the wizarding world. Movements that concern us, for reasons I cannot discuss." He slid the parchment across the desk. "This contains information about Augustus Rookwood. His history, his connections, his known associates. Use it wisely." Harry took the parchment. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. This is not a favor, it's an investment. The goblins believe you have potential, Mr. Potter. Potential to change things, to break cycles that have persisted for centuries." Ironclaw's eyes glittered. "We want to see what you become. And we want to make sure that whatever you become, you remember who helped you along the way." Harry nodded slowly. "I won't forget." "See that you don't." Ironclaw stood. "Now go. You have a Dark Lord to prepare for, and time is shorter than you think." The information on Rookwood was damning. Former unspeakable, specializing in time magic and prophecy research. Arrested after the war on suspicion of being a Death Eater spy, but released when key evidence mysteriously disappeared. Now officially retired, living quietly in Wales, apparently harmless. But Harry knew better. Rookwood was the architect. The man who had transformed Voldemort's scattered followers into a coherent network, who had built communication channels and safe houses and escape routes, who was preparing for the day when the Dark Lord would return and reward his faithful servants. And he was interested in Harry. The question was why. Harry's legilimency was unusual, yes, but it shouldn't have attracted this level of attention. There had to be something else, something about him that made the faithful think he could be useful. The prophecy. It had to be the prophecy. Harry knew only the fragment that Dumbledore had revealed, something about a child born at the end of July, with power the Dark Lord knew not. But there had to be more. Prophecies were complex things, full of layers and hidden meanings. If Rookwood had been researching prophecy at the Department of Mysteries, he might know the full text. He might know things about Harry's destiny that even Dumbledore didn't understand. It was a terrifying thought. And a tempting one. The decision to leave Privet Drive came sooner than expected. Harry had always planned to emancipate himself eventually. His research had revealed obscure provisions in wizarding law that allowed orphaned heirs to claim adult status under certain circumstances. But he'd intended to wait until he was at least 11, when his Hogwarts enrollment would provide additional justification. Vernon changed his timeline. The beating happened on a Saturday night, 3 weeks before Harry's 10th birthday. Vernon had been drinking, more than usual, the stress of his damaged career pushing him toward the bottle that had destroyed his own father. Harry had made the mistake of being visible, of existing in Vernon's line of sight at the exact wrong moment. The first blow came without warning. Harry's shields, focused outward, didn't catch the surge of rage until Vernon's fist was already connecting with his jaw. He went down hard. Instinct took over: curl into a ball, protect your head, ride out the storm. He'd done it 100 times before, learned exactly how to minimize the damage while waiting for Vernon's fury to burn itself out. But this time was different. This time, Vernon didn't stop. The kicks came fast and brutal, each one driven by years of frustrated ambition and suppressed fear. Harry felt ribs crack. Felt blood fill his mouth. Felt his vision start to blur as his body threatened to shut down. And then, without conscious decision, his power surged. It wasn't legilimency. It was something else, something raw and primal that had been sleeping inside him since the night his mother died. It rose up through his broken body like fire through dead wood, and it pushed outward, and Vernon Dursley flew across the room like he'd been hit by a truck. The silence that followed was absolute. Harry lay on the floor, gasping, his body a symphony of agony. Vernon was slumped against the far wall, unconscious or dead. Harry couldn't tell and didn't care. Somewhere upstairs, Petunia and Dudley were screaming. Harry reached for his magic and pushed again. He didn't know what he was doing. He just knew that he needed to move, needed to get out, needed to be somewhere safe before Ministry officials arrived to investigate the unauthorized magic. His body refused to cooperate, but his power didn't care about his body's limitations. He apparat. It was impossible, he knew that even as it happened. Apparition required training, concentration, a clear destination in mind. Harry had none of those things. He had only desperation and pain and a bone-deep certainty that he would not die in this house. The world twisted around him, and then he was somewhere else. Ironclaw found him on the steps of Gringotts, bleeding and semi-conscious, his magic flickering like a candle in the wind. "Mr. Potter." The goblin's voice was sharp. "What happened?" Harry tried to speak, but only blood came out. Ironclaw made a decision. Within minutes, Harry was in a private room deep within the bank, surrounded by goblin healers whose magic was different from anything he'd encountered before, older, stranger, focused entirely on preserving the client's ability to manage their assets. It took them 3 hours to repair the damage. When Harry finally woke, Ironclaw was sitting beside his bed, his expression unreadable. "You should be dead," the goblin said. "The injuries you sustained, combined with the magical exertion of an untrained apparition, but I'm not dead." "No. You're not." Ironclaw's eyes glittered. "You are, however, officially homeless. The Ministry has been notified of the incident at Privet Drive. Your uncle is in hospital with injuries he cannot explain. Your aunt has filed a statement claiming you attacked him unprovoked. She's lying. Obviously. But the Ministry is not known for its careful investigation of Muggle affairs, and Dumbledore's influence is not what it once was. If you return to Privet Drive, you will be charged with assault." Harry closed his eyes. His body still ached, but the pain was distant now, filtered through the goblin healing magic that still hummed in his blood. What are my options? Limited. Ironclaw pulled out a document. However, there is a precedent. The Potter estate includes a provision for minor heirs to claim emancipated status in cases of extreme duress. You would need to demonstrate that your current guardians are unfit, that you have the resources to support yourself, and that you are mentally competent to manage your own affairs. That last part might be difficult. On the contrary. Ironclaw's thin lips twitched. I have spent 2 years watching you operate, Mr. Potter. You are more mentally competent than most adults I know. Harry opened his eyes. You're offering to help me? I'm offering to facilitate. The final decision must be yours. Ironclaw slid the document onto the bed. Read this. Consider your options. And when you've decided, let me know. Harry picked up the document. His hands were steady, despite everything. I don't need to consider, he said. I'm not going back. I'm never going back. Then sign the papers, and we'll begin. Harry signed. For the first time in his life, he was free. The flat was small but perfect. Located in a wizarding neighborhood near Diagon Alley, it consisted of a single room that had been magically expanded to include a bedroom, a study, a small kitchen, and a bathroom that was larger than Harry's cupboard had been. Gringotts had arranged the purchase, and goblin wardsmiths had layered protections over every surface, anti-intrusion wards, notice-me-not charms, emergency port keys that would activate if Harry's life was threatened. Harry stood in the center of his new home and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Safety. No more footsteps above his head. No more fists in the dark. No more wondering if tonight would be the night that Vernon went too far. He walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Witches and wizards passed by, going about their business, completely unaware of the child watching from above. The child who could read their thoughts, who could sense their secrets, who carried the weight of a prophecy he didn't fully understand. Harry Potter. The boy who lived. Natural Legilimens. Political player. And now, at age 9, master of his own fate. The window reflected his face back at him, thin, pale, marked by a lightning scar that throbbed faintly in the presence of strong magic. He looked young. Fragile. Like a child who could be broken with a single well-placed blow. He smiled. Let them think he was fragile. Let them underestimate him. Every enemy who assumed he was weak was an enemy who wouldn't see him coming. The faithful thought they could recruit him. Dumbledore thought he could guide him. Lucius Malfoy thought he could use him. They were all wrong. Harry Potter belonged to no one but himself. And he was just getting started. Hogwarts loomed on the horizon. In 3 weeks, Harry would board the train to a castle full of magical children and ancient secrets. He would meet teachers who had known his parents, classmates who had grown up hearing stories about him, a headmaster who was simultaneously trying to protect and manipulate him. He would also meet the hidden threat, the one he'd glimpsed in Rookwood's network, the presence inside Hogwarts that the faithful had placed there years ago. Someone was waiting for him, and Harry intended to find out who. But first, he had one more piece of business to attend to. He wrote a letter to Miranda. Dear M, I know we agreed not to write until I was settled at Hogwarts, but things have changed. I've left the Dursleys, permanently, and I'm now living on my own in the wizarding world. It's strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. I wanted you to know that I haven't forgotten you. I haven't forgotten what you told me about your family, about how they threw you away because you didn't fit their definition of valuable. And I wanted you to know that I'm going to do something about it. I don't know exactly what yet. I don't have a plan, not a real one. But I'm going to learn everything I can, make all the connections I can, build as much power as I can. And when I'm ready, I'm going to change things. For people like us. For everyone who's ever been told they're not good enough. Wait for me. This is just the beginning. He sent the letter and turned back to his preparations. September was coming. Hogwarts was waiting. And Harry Potter was ready. The night before he left, Harry had a visitor. He sensed her approaching long before she reached his door, a magical signature he recognized from Mrs. Figg's memories. Narcissa Malfoy, alone, her thoughts carefully shielded but leaking traces of desperation. He opened the door before she could knock. Mrs. Malfoy. Harry kept his voice neutral. This is unexpected. Narcissa stood in the hallway, her aristocratic features pale in the lamplight. She looked different than she had at Malfoy Manor, smaller, somehow, as if something had been pressing down on her. May I come in? Harry stepped aside. Narcissa entered the flat, her eyes flickering over the modest furnishings without comment. She moved to the center of the room and stood there, her hands clasped in front of her, visibly struggling with something. I know about the faithful, she said finally. I know Lucius is involved. I know they've approached you. Harry said nothing. What I'm about to tell you could destroy my family. If Lucius ever found out. Narcissa's voice broke. But I can't watch my son become what his father has become. I can't let him be inducted into that world, made complicit in things that will haunt him forever. What are you asking me, Mrs. Malfoy? Narcissa met his eyes. Help him. Draco. When you're at Hogwarts together, help him find a different path. Show him that there's more to life than blood purity and dark lords and the endless pursuit of power. Harry considered her. Her shields were down now, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of fear and hope and maternal desperation. She loved her son, that much was unmistakable. And she was terrified of what he would become if nothing changed. Why me? Because you're not like the others. Narcissa took a step closer. I've watched you, Mr. Potter. I've listened to Lucius's reports, read between the lines of what he says and doesn't say. You have every reason to hate my family, to want revenge for what the Dark Lord did to your parents. But instead, you're playing a longer game. You're building something. And you think I can save Draco from himself. I think you're the only one who can. Narcissa's voice was barely above a whisper. The only one who sees clearly enough, who cares enough, who has the power to make a difference. Please. He's just a child. He didn't choose this life. Harry thought about Draco, the arrogant boy he'd met at Malfoy Manor, the cousin Miranda had never known, the heir to a legacy of darkness and hate. He thought about the years of abuse he'd suffered at Vernon's hands, and the moment he'd looked at Petunia's grief and chosen compassion over cruelty. I can't promise anything, he said. Draco will make his own choices, just like everyone else. But I'll try. I'll give him the chance to be something better, if he wants it. Narcissa's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Harry walked to the door. And Mrs. Malfoy? This conversation never happened. If Lucius asks, you came here to deliver a message from the Board of Governors. Nothing more. Narcissa nodded. Of course. She left without another word. Harry watched her go, his mind already working through the implications. Narcissa Malfoy was desperate enough to betray her husband. That meant Lucius's position was weaker than it appeared, cracks in the foundation that could be exploited. And Draco might be an asset after all, if Harry played his cards right. The game was getting more complicated. Harry smiled. He wouldn't have it any other way. The morning of September 1st arrived with grey skies and the promise of rain. Harry packed his trunk with care, books from the Potter Vault, robes purchased from Madame Malkin's, a wand of holly and phoenix feather that had chosen him weeks ago with a shower of sparks and a sense of coming home. He checked his wards, activated his emergency protocols, and took one last look around the flat that had become his sanctuary. Then he headed for King's Cross. Platform 9 3/4 was chaos, students and parents and owls and cats, trunks being loaded and tearful goodbyes being exchanged, the Hogwarts Express gleaming scarlet against the grey morning light. Harry moved through the crowd with his shields tight, reading surface thoughts but not pushing deeper, cataloguing faces and names for future reference. He found an empty compartment near the back of the train and settled in by the window. Soon enough, others would join him, the curious, the ambitious, the ones who wanted to meet the famous boy who lived. For now, he enjoyed the quiet. The train began to move. Harry watched London slide past the window, giving way to suburbs, then to countryside. He thought about everything that had brought him to this moment, the cupboard, the hunger, the moment when his power first awoke. The years of learning and planning and building. The enemies he'd made and the allies he'd gathered. He was 10 years old. He was going to Hogwarts. And somewhere in that castle, hidden among the teachers and students and ancient stones, was a threat that even Dumbledore hadn't detected. Harry smiled. Let the games begin. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Architect's Gambit. The Hogwarts Express cut through the Scottish countryside like a scarlet ribbon, and Harry watched the world blur past while his mind catalogued every student who walked by his compartment. Most glanced through the window, saw a thin boy with messy black hair, and moved on. A few lingered, their thoughts flickering with curiosity. Is that him? Could that be Potter? He doesn't look like much, before social awkwardness drove them away. Harry let them go. He wasn't here to make friends indiscriminately. He was here to find the hidden threat. The faithful had someone at Hogwarts. He'd pulled that much from the woman in Diagon Alley before she'd realized what he was doing. A long-term asset, embedded for years, waiting for the right moment to act. Harry had narrowed the possibilities to staff. Students were too young, too transient, but beyond that, his information was frustratingly vague. The compartment door slid open. Mind if we sit here? Everywhere else is full. Harry looked up at a gangly red-haired boy with a smudge of dirt on his nose and an expression of hopeful embarrassment. Behind him, barely visible, was a round-faced boy clutching a toad like it might escape at any moment. Ron Weasley and Neville Longbottom. Harry had been expecting them, or at least, he'd been hoping. Augusta's acceptance of his alliance proposal had come through just days before term began, and the Weasleys were well-known blood traders whose opposition to Voldemort was legendary. Please. Harry gestured to the seats across from him. I'm Harry. I know who you are. Ron's ears went red the moment the words left his mouth. I mean, sorry, that was, everyone knows who you are, don't they? Harry Potter. The boy who, just Harry is fine. Ron dropped into the seat with visible relief, and Neville followed, still clutching his toad. Harry let their surface thoughts wash over him, Ron's nervous excitement, his desperate desire to make a good impression, his worry that he'd already ruined everything. Neville's deeper anxiety, the weight of expectations he didn't know how to carry, the persistent fear that his grandmother had been right about him all along. I'm Ron. Ron Weasley. Ron stuck out his hand, and Harry shook it. And this is Neville Longbottom. His toad keeps trying to escape. Trevor. Neville's voice was barely audible. He's called Trevor. Good name for a toad. Harry smiled, and something in Neville's posture relaxed slightly. My grandmother was friends with your grandmother, Neville. She used to tell me stories about the Longbottoms. Did she? Neville looked startled. I didn't know, Gran never mentioned, I think they lost touch after the war. A lot of people did. The lie came easily. Harry had no grandmother, of course, no family at all except the Dursleys, who barely counted. But the fiction served a purpose, it gave him common ground with Neville, a reason for their association that wouldn't raise suspicions. So. Ron leaned forward, his nervousness giving way to curiosity. Is it true? About you-know-who and the, he gestured vaguely at his forehead. The scar. Harry pushed his fringe aside, revealing the lightning bolt. It's real. I don't remember much about that night, though. I was only a year old. But you survived the killing curse. Nobody's ever done that before. My mother did something. A sacrifice, some kind of old magic. Harry let his voice go soft, thoughtful. She gave her life to protect me, and somehow that was enough to reflect the curse back at Voldemort. Ron flinched at the name. Neville went pale. You can say his name. Ron's voice was hushed. He killed my parents. I'm not going to give him the power of my fear too. Harry met Ron's eyes steadily. He was just a man, Ron. A powerful wizard, yes, and a monster, but still just a man. And men can be beaten. Something shifted in Ron's expression, a spark of something that might have been admiration. Beside him, Neville was staring at Harry like he'd never seen anything quite like him. I've never heard anyone talk about him like that, Neville said quietly. Like he was, ordinary. Evil is always ordinary, when you look closely enough. Harry thought of Vernon's rage, Petunia's bitterness, the 1,000 small cruelties that made up a life of abuse. The extraordinary part is choosing to stand against it. The compartment door opened again before anyone could respond. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. The girl who stood in the doorway had bushy brown hair, front teeth slightly too large for her face, and the most intensely organized mind Harry had ever encountered. Her surface thoughts were a rapid-fire stream of information. Chapter 7 of Hogwarts, a history mentions the Sorting Hat. I wonder which house I'll be in. Father said I should try to make friends, but everyone seems so different, layered over a foundation of desperate loneliness that made Harry's chest ache with recognition. Hermione Granger. Muggle-born, brilliant, and absolutely terrified of failing. The toad's right here. Harry nodded toward Trevor, still clutched in Neville's hands. Hasn't escaped yet. Oh. Hermione's cheeks flushed. Oh, good. I've been asking up and down the train, and nobody seemed to, anyway. She straightened, visibly collecting herself. I'm Hermione Granger. I've read all about you in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts and great wizarding events of the 20th century. Have you? Harry kept his expression pleasant. I hope they got some things right. They say you defeated you-know-who as a baby and that nobody knows how you survived and that you've been living with muggles for years and, Hermione stopped abruptly, apparently realizing she was rambling. Sorry. I've been so excited to finally be part of the wizarding world, and you're the most famous person in it, and I suppose I'm a bit overwhelming. You're enthusiastic. That's not a bad thing. Harry smiled. Hermione's face lit up with a hope so raw it was almost painful. Really? You wouldn't mind? Of course not. Here, Harry shifted to make room. Tell me about yourself. I'd rather hear real things than whatever the books say about me. She sat, still slightly flushed, and began to talk. Harry listened, but his attention was split, part on Hermione's rapid-fire biography, part on the thoughts flickering through the minds around him, part on the subtle wrongness he'd been sensing since the train left London. Someone on this train was shielded. Not perfectly, the wards were old, maybe even failing, but well enough to create a void in Harry's awareness. A blank spot where a mind should be. He filed it away for later investigation and focused on making allies. The sorting was everything Harry had anticipated and nothing like he'd imagined. The Great Hall was a cathedral of candlelight and ancient stone, its ceiling enchanted to mirror the stormy sky outside. For long tables stretched toward a raised platform where the staff sat watching, their thoughts a mixture of professional interest and personal preoccupation. Harry scanned them as McGonagall led the first-years down the center aisle. Dumbledore, his shields impenetrable as always, watching Harry with a complex mixture of hope and concern. Severus Snape, glowering at the Gryffindor table, his thoughts a tightly controlled spiral of old bitterness. Pomona Sprout, kind and distracted, already planning her first herbology lessons. Filius Flitwick, brilliant and curious, his goblin ancestry showing in the sharpness of his mental patterns. And at the far end of the table, a man Harry had never seen before. He was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s, with a pale face and a turban wrapped around his head that seemed slightly askew. His surface thoughts were a stuttering mess of anxiety and self-doubt. Don't drop anything, don't stammer, they're all watching, Dumbledore is watching, but beneath that surface, Harry sensed the void. Not the professional acclimacy of someone trained to hide their thoughts. Something else. Something that felt wrong in ways Harry couldn't articulate. A second presence, coiled behind the man's eyes, watching the students with an attention that had nothing to do with academic interest. Professor Quirrell. Defense against the dark arts. The Faithful's agent at Hogwarts. No, more than that. Something worse. Harry filed the information away and focused on the sorting. Names were called alphabetically. Abbott, Hannah, went to Hufflepuff. Bones, Susan, a relative of Amelia, Harry noted, joined her. The line shortened steadily, each student taking their turn under the hat, their fates decided by an artifact older than the castle itself. Granger, Hermione. Hermione practically ran to the stool, her anxiety spiking so high that Harry could feel it from 20 feet away. The hat sat on her head for nearly a minute, an eternity in sorting terms, before calling out, Gryffindor. She sagged with relief and hurried to the cheering table, her thoughts a giddy swirl of I did it, I'm really here, maybe I can finally belong somewhere. Longbottom, Neville. Neville's sorting took even longer. Harry watched the hat's brim wrinkle with what might have been concentration, felt the edges of a conversation happening just below the level of conscious thought. When the hat finally shouted, Gryffindor. Neville looked genuinely shocked. Malfoy, Draco. The blond boy walked to the stool with the arrogant stride Harry remembered from their meeting, but his thoughts told a different story. Beneath the confidence was fear, fear of failing his father, fear of being found wanting, fear of the legacy he was expected to carry. The hat barely touched his head before declaring, Slytherin. Draco's relief was palpable as he walked to the green and silver table, his mask firmly back in place. Harry noted the way Snape's expression flickered with something like approval, and the way Dumbledore's gaze followed the boy with something like concern. Potter, Harry. The whispers started immediately. Potter, did she say Potter? The Harry Potter? Harry walked to the stool, his shields locked down tight, and sat. The hat dropped over his eyes, blocking out the great hall's candlelight. Well, well. What have we here? The voice was inside his head, different from the thoughts he usually read, more structured, more intentional. The hat was genuinely sentient, Harry realized. Not just an enchantment but a true intelligence, ancient and patient and very, very curious. You're not what I expected, Mr. Potter. Harry kept his mental voice calm. What did you expect? Your father was easy. Gryffindor through and through, brave to the point of foolishness, loyal to a fault, convinced of his own rightness in all things. Your mother was more complex, but still straightforward. A Gryffindor's heart in a Ravenclaw's mind. And me? You. The hat paused, and Harry felt something like surprise ripple through the enchantment. You have layers, Mr. Potter. Courage, yes, you've faced things that would break most adults. But also cunning, strategy, the ability to see 3 moves ahead and plan for contingencies. And beneath it all, a ruthlessness that you've chosen to constrain but could easily let loose. I've had an unusual childhood. I see that. I see all of it. The hat's voice softened. The cupboard. The hunger. The moment your gift awoke and you learned what people truly are beneath their masks. You have every reason to hate the world, Harry Potter. Every justification for cruelty and vengeance. And yet. And yet? And yet you chose mercy. Again and again, when you could have destroyed the people who hurt you, you chose to understand them instead. When you could have become a monster, you chose to become something else. Harry said nothing. That's rare, you know. Rarer than your legilimency, rarer than your survival. Most people who suffer as you have either break or become what broke them. You did neither. You made yourself into something new. I'm still figuring out what that something is. Aren't we all? The hat chuckled, an odd sensation, like laughter vibrating through Harry's skull. The question now is where to put you. You do well in Slytherin, your cunning is genuine, your ambition extraordinary. But Ravenclaw would value your intelligence, and Hufflepuff would appreciate your hard-won capacity for compassion. And Gryffindor? Gryffindor would give you something you need more than any of those things. The hat's voice grew serious. Allies, Mr. Potter. True friends who value courage and loyalty above all else. You've spent your life alone, surrounded by enemies. In Gryffindor, you would find people willing to stand beside you not because of what you can do for them, but because of who you are. Harry thought about Hermione's desperate loneliness. About Neville's buried courage. About Ron's nervous warmth. You're right, he said finally. I think I would. Then it had better be, Gryffindor. The great hall erupted. The feast passed in a blur of food and conversation, and then they were climbing endless staircases toward Gryffindor Tower, following a prefect whose name Harry immediately forgot. The common room was warm and red and full of students who wanted to shake his hand or ask him questions or simply stare. Harry endured it with practiced patience, deflecting inquiries with vague answers and redirecting attention to his new friends whenever possible. By the time they reached the first-year dormitory, he was exhausted in ways that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. The beds were four posters with crimson hangings, arranged in a circle around a central fireplace. Harry claimed the one nearest the window, where he could see the grounds and the sky, and began unpacking his trunk. Ron took the bed next to him. That was mental. The way everyone reacted when you got sorted, I thought Percy was going to have a heart attack. Percy? My brother. The prefect. Ron's nose wrinkled. He takes everything very seriously. I noticed. Harry smiled. How many brothers do you have? 5. And a sister. Ron flopped onto his bed with a groan. I'm the 6th son. Everything I have is second-hand, my robes, my wand, even my rat. He pulled a fat gray rat from his pocket, its thoughts a sleepy haze of warmth and food desire. This is Scabbers. He used to belong to Percy. Harry looked at the rat. Looked closer. Something was wrong. The animal's thoughts were too complex for a rat. Too organized. Harry reached deeper, pushing against what felt like shields. Impossible, animals didn't have shields, and caught a fragment of something beneath the surface. Terror. Old, deep terror, buried under years of hiding. Nice rat, Harry said, keeping his voice casual. How long has he been in your family? 12 years, if you can believe it. Percy found him in the garden when he was little. Ron scratched Scabbers behind the ears. Mum says it's unusual for rats to live this long, but I figure he's just stubborn. 12 years. The same length of time since Voldemort's fall. Harry filed that away and changed the subject. The first week at Hogwarts was a carefully orchestrated performance. Harry attended classes, did his homework, made friends with his dorm mates, and pretended to be a normal first-year student discovering magic for the first time. He let himself struggle with transfiguration, excel at charms, and approach potions with the wary caution that everyone seemed to expect from a Gryffindor. Snape was exactly as unpleasant as Harry had anticipated. The man's hatred of James Potter had curdled into something that made him incapable of seeing Harry as anything other than his father's son, and every interaction was colored by old wounds that would never heal. But beneath the cruelty, Harry sensed something else. Guilt. Regret. A desperate need to honor Lily's memory by keeping her son alive, even if he couldn't bring himself to be kind about it. Harry let Snape hate him. It was easier than the alternative. Quirrell was harder to read. The defense professor's surface thoughts were a constant stream of anxiety and self-deprecation, his stutter so pronounced that students had started mocking him within days. But Harry could feel the void behind his eyes, the second presence that watched and waited and calculated. On the third day, Harry's scar started to hurt. It was a low throb at first, barely noticeable. But whenever he entered Quirrell's classroom, whenever he caught the professor's eye across the great hall, the pain intensified. Something about the man, or the thing inside the man, resonated with the mark Voldemort had left on Harry's forehead. Harry didn't tell anyone. He just watched, and waited, and planned. The letter from Rookwood arrived on a Friday night. Harry was alone in the common room, the other students long since asleep, when an owl he didn't recognize tapped at the window. The message it carried was sealed with unmarked wax, and the handwriting was elegant and precise. Dear Mr. Potter, we haven't had the pleasure of meeting, but I believe we have much to discuss. Your recent activities have attracted considerable attention from certain quarters, and I find myself curious about your intentions. I am not your enemy. I am not, despite what you may have been told, a simple follower seeking the return of an old master. I am a scholar, a student of magic in its deepest forms, and I recognize in you a kindred spirit. You see what others cannot see. You understand what others refuse to understand. And you have been searching for answers that the conventional authorities are unwilling to provide. I can give you those answers. I can tell you about the prophecy, the full prophecy, not the fragment Dumbledore deigned to share. I can explain what you truly are, what powers sleep inside you waiting to awaken. And I can show you a path forward that doesn't require you to serve as anyone's weapon. All I ask in return is a conversation. A meeting of minds, if you'll forgive the phrase. No commitments, no oaths, no obligations. Just two intelligent beings discussing matters of mutual interest. If you're curious, and I believe you are, respond to this letter. The owl will find me. With respect, Augustus Rookwood. Harry read the letter 3 times. Then he burned it. The architect was making his move. The question was whether to engage or to retreat. Harry thought about it for a long time, staring into the common room fire. Rookwood was dangerous, the most dangerous enemy Harry had encountered yet. But he was also offering something Harry desperately needed, information about the prophecy, about his own abilities, about the forces that had shaped his life since before he was born. The smart play was to refuse. To report the contact to Dumbledore or Amelia Bones, to let the authorities handle the threat while Harry focused on being a student. But Harry had never been very good at letting others handle things for him. He pulled out parchment and quill. Dear Mr. Rookwood, your offer is intriguing, if transparently manipulative. You want something from me, that much is obvious, and you're hoping that my curiosity will override my caution. You're right. It will. But understand this, I am not naive. I know what you are, what you've done, what you're planning. I know about the faithful, about the network you've built, about the agents you've placed throughout Wizarding Society. And I know that any meeting between us will be a contest of wills, with both of us trying to gain advantage over the other. I accept those terms. Name a time and place. I'll be there. Harry Potter. He sent the letter before he could change his mind. Hermione noticed something was wrong almost immediately. You've been distracted all day, she said during their study session in the library. Did something happen? Harry looked up from the charms textbook he'd been pretending to read. Hermione's thoughts were a mixture of concern and curiosity, her analytical mind already cataloging his behavior and searching for patterns. Just tired, he said. The castle takes some getting used to. It's more than that. Hermione set down her quill. You've been watching Professor Quirrell. Every time we have defense, you barely take your eyes off him. And your scar, you keep touching it, like it hurts. Harry's hand dropped from his forehead. He hadn't realized he'd been doing that. You're very observant. I notice things. Hermione's voice was careful. Harry, if something's wrong, you can tell me. We're friends, aren't we? The question hung in the air between them. Harry thought about all the secrets he was keeping, the Legilimency, the faithful, the letter from Rookwood that was probably being read at this very moment. He thought about the weight of carrying everything alone, and the risk of sharing any of it with someone else. "We're friends," he said finally. "And I appreciate your concern. But some things I need to handle myself." Hermione's expression flickered with hurt, but she nodded. "Okay. But if you ever want to talk, I know where to find you." Harry smiled. "Thank you, Hermione. Really." She went back to her books, but Harry could feel her thoughts still churning with worry. She cared about him, genuinely cared, in a way that had nothing to do with his fame or his potential usefulness. It was a strange feeling, being cared for. He wasn't sure he liked it. Halloween brought crisis. Harry felt the troll before anyone saw it, a dim, brutish consciousness somewhere in the lower levels of the castle, filled with rage and hunger and the simple imperative to destroy. Then the screaming started, and Professor Quirrell burst into the great hall with his turban askew and his voice cracking with panic. "Troll! In the dungeons! Thought you ought to know." He collapsed in a theatrical faint. Harry's scar exploded with pain. Through the agony, he felt something else, a cold satisfaction emanating from the void behind Quirrell's eyes. The troll wasn't an accident. It was a distraction. And while everyone was focused on the immediate threat, the thing inside Quirrell was planning to move. "Hermione," Harry gasped, grabbing Ron's arm. "Where's Hermione?" "She wasn't at dinner." Ron's face went pale. "I heard, she was crying in the bathroom earlier." Lavender said something about. Harry didn't wait to hear the rest. He was already running. The bathroom was on the first floor, directly between the dungeons and wherever Quirrell was heading. Harry heard the troll before he saw it, heavy footsteps, grunting breaths, the splintering crash of something large breaking through a door. He rounded the corner and froze. The troll was enormous, 12 feet tall, gray-skinned, with a tiny head and a club the size of a tree trunk. It was standing in the doorway of the girls' bathroom, its attention fixed on something inside. Hermione's scream cut through the air. Harry didn't think. He reached into the troll's mind, shallow, almost empty, driven by instinct rather than thought, and pushed. "Stop." The troll stopped. It stood motionless, its club raised, its dim consciousness struggling against an intrusion it couldn't understand. Harry pushed harder, forcing calm where there had been rage, confusion where there had been hunger. "Turn around. Leave. Go back to the dungeons." The troll turned. Slowly, ponderously, like a ship changing course, it began to walk away. Harry let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Harry!" Ron came skidding around the corner, his wand out, his face white with terror. Behind him, Neville was struggling to keep up, his round face streaked with sweat. "It's okay." Harry's voice was steadier than he felt. "It's leaving." "Leaving?" Ron stared at the retreating troll. "How, what did you, later?" Harry pushed past him into the bathroom. "Hermione? Are you okay?" She was huddled under a sink, her robes torn and her face streaked with tears, but unharmed. Her thoughts were a chaos of terror and disbelief and something that might have been wonder. "You stopped it," she whispered. You looked at it and it stopped." Harry knelt beside her. "Can you walk?" Yes, I think so." She took his offered hand and let him pull her to her feet. "Harry, how did you do that?" "Trolls are supposed to be resistant to magic, the textbooks say. Sometimes the textbooks are wrong." Harry helped her toward the door. "We need to get out of here before the teachers, Mr. Potter." McGonagall's voice cut through the corridor like a blade. She came sweeping toward them, her face white with fury, Snape and Quirrell close behind. "What is the meaning of this? Students are supposed to be in their common rooms. You could have been killed." Harry's scar throbbed. Quirrell was watching him, his surface thoughts a mess of stuttering anxiety, but beneath them the void was focused and calculating. "He knows," Harry realized. Whatever I did to that troll, he saw it somehow. He knows I'm not just a normal student. I'm sorry, Professor. Harry kept his voice meek, his expression apologetic. We heard Hermione was in danger and we came to help. By the time we got here, the troll was already leaving. Leaving? McGonagall's eyebrows rose. Trolls don't simply leave. This one did. Harry shrugged. Maybe the noise scared it off. McGonagall didn't look convinced, but she was too relieved to argue. 5 points from Gryffindor for your recklessness. And 5 points to each of you for sheer dumb luck. She paused. Miss Granger, are you injured? And no, Professor. Hermione's voice was still shaky. I'm fine. Harry saved me. So I see. McGonagall's expression softened slightly. Get back to your common room, all of you. And Mr. Potter? Yes, Professor. Don't make a habit of heroics. They tend to end badly. Harry nodded and led his friends away. But he could feel Quirrell's eyes on his back, and the void behind them was very, very interested. Rookwood's response came the next morning. Dear Mr. Potter, the 3 broomsticks in Hogsmeade, this Saturday at noon. The village will be empty, no student visits until 3rd year, and we can speak privately. I look forward to meeting you. Harry stared at the letter for a long moment. Saturday was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare, to plan, to figure out how to survive a meeting with the most dangerous wizard he'd ever tracked. He wrote back a single word, agreed. Then he went to find Ironclaw. The goblin was not happy. You're walking into a trap, Ironclaw said flatly, his alien features harsh in the dim light of his office. Rookwood is an unspeakable, a Death Eater, and by all accounts one of the most skilled duelists of his generation. Even with your abilities, I know the risks. Harry sat across from him, his expression calm. But I need what he knows. The prophecy, my powers, the truth about what I am, he has answers that no one else can give me. There are other ways to learn those things. Name one. Ironclaw was silent. That's what I thought. Harry leaned forward. I'm not asking for your blessing, Ironclaw. I'm asking for your help. I need emergency portkeys, monitoring charms, anything that might give me an edge. The faithful will detect anything we place on you. Then give me something they won't detect. Something goblin made. Ironclaw studied him for a long moment, his thoughts hidden behind shields that Harry had never tried to penetrate. Whatever calculations were running through that alien mind, Harry couldn't follow them. There is something, the goblin said finally. An artifact we've kept in reserve for situations exactly like this. It's called a soul anchor. It creates a connection between your consciousness and a secure location, allowing us to pull you out if something goes wrong. And the catch? It requires a blood bond. You would be linking yourself to Gringotts in a way that cannot be easily broken. Harry considered the implications. Binding himself to the goblins was a significant step, a commitment that went beyond financial partnership into something more permanent. But the alternative was walking into Rookwood's trap with no backup and no escape route. Do it, he said. Ironclaw nodded slowly. Very well. But understand, Mr. Potter, if you die despite our precautions, the goblins will consider our investment lost. And we do not take kindly to lost investments. I'll keep that in mind. Saturday morning dawned cold and grey, the Scottish autumn settling over Hogwarts like a damp blanket. Harry slipped out of the castle before sunrise, using passages from his family's vault that predated the current building, and made his way to Hogsmeade through the pre-dawn darkness. The village was quiet, shops closed, streets empty, the 3 broomsticks showing only a single light in an upstairs window. Harry paused at the edge of the main square, extending his senses outward, searching for threats. He counted 5 wizards in concealed positions around the pub. 4 more in the alleys between buildings. And inside the 3 broomsticks itself, two powerful magical signatures, Rookwood himself, and something else. Something familiar. His scar throbbed. Interesting, Harry thought. The architect brought backup. He walked into the pub anyway. The interior was empty except for a single table near the fireplace, where Augustus Rookwood sat nursing a glass of amber liquid. The former unspeakable was older than Harry had expected, mid-50s, with iron-gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His thoughts were locked behind a clemency so perfect that Harry could barely sense the edges. "Mr. Potter." Rookwood's voice was cultured, almost gentle. "Please, sit. Can I offer you something to drink?" "No, thank you." Harry took the chair across from him, positioning himself so he could see both the door and the stairs. "Your men outside, are they necessary?" Rookwood smiled. "Precautions. Surely you understand." "I understand that if you wanted me dead, I wouldn't have made it through the door." Harry kept his voice casual. "Which means you want something else. So let's skip the posturing and get to it. Direct." "I appreciate that." Rookwood set down his glass. "You're right, of course. I didn't bring you here to kill you. I brought you here to make an offer. I've already received your offer. Join the faithful, serve the Dark Lord, help bring about his glorious return." "Not interested." "That was someone else's offer, made by someone who doesn't understand what you truly are." Rookwood leaned forward. "I'm offering something different. Something that has nothing to do with old loyalties or dead causes." "I'm listening." "You're a natural Legilimens. Not just talented, natural. Born with the ability, like Salazar Slytherin himself." Rookwood's eyes were intent. "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" "1 in 100,000 wizards, perhaps 1 in a million. And of those, most go mad before they reach adulthood." "I'm aware. You're also the subject of a prophecy. The full text of which you have never been allowed to hear." Rookwood paused. Harry's heart rate spiked, but he kept his expression neutral. "That depends on the price." "No price. Consider it a gesture of good faith." Rookwood's smile was thin. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies. And the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not. And either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." Harry let the words sink in. Most of it he'd already known or guessed, but that last line was new. Neither can live while the other survives. A death sentence, written in prophecy before he was even born. "So one of us has to kill the other," he said quietly. "According to the prophecy, yes. But prophecies are not destiny, Mr. Potter. They are possibilities. Potential futures that may or may not come to pass, depending on the choices we make. And you have an alternative?" "I have information." Rookwood sat back. "The Dark Lord is not dead. You know this already, I suspect. He exists in a diminished form, sustained by dark magic, waiting for the opportunity to return. That opportunity is closer than anyone realizes." Harry thought of Quirrell. Of the void behind his eyes, the second presence that watched and calculated. "He's at Hogwarts," Harry said. "Attached to someone. Using them as a host." Rookwood's eyebrows rose. "You know more than I expected." "I know enough." Harry met his eyes. "What I don't know is why you're telling me this. The faithful serve Voldemort. If he's returning, you should be helping him, not warning his prophesied enemy. The faithful serve an ideal, Mr. Potter. A vision of the wizarding world freed from Muggle contamination, ruled by those with the power and wisdom to lead." Rookwood's voice was smooth. "The Dark Lord was the embodiment of that ideal once. But the creature hiding in Hogwarts, the desperate spirit clinging to a stolen body, is not the leader we followed. It is a shadow of what he was. A remnant, dangerous and unstable. You want to replace him. I want to build something better. Rookwood leaned forward. You have power, Mr. Potter. Power that even the Dark Lord never possessed. With proper training, proper guidance, you could become something extraordinary. You could lead the wizarding world into a new era, not through terror and destruction, but through genuine transformation. And you would be my advisor, I suppose. The power behind the throne. I would be your teacher. Your partner. Your ally. Rookwood's voice was compelling, seductive. Think about it, Mr. Potter. Everything you've ever wanted, answers, power, the ability to protect the people you care about, I can give you all of it. All you have to do is trust me. Harry looked at him. Looked past the acclimacy, past the careful rhetoric, past the facade of reasonableness. He couldn't read Rookwood's thoughts, but he could read his intentions. The man was telling the truth, at least, a version of it. He genuinely wanted to replace Voldemort, to build something new on the Dark Lord's ashes. And he genuinely believed that Harry could be molded into the leader he envisioned. What he didn't realize was that Harry could see exactly what kind of leader that would be. You want to use me, Harry said quietly. Just like everyone else. Dumbledore wants me as a weapon against Voldemort. The faithful want me as a figurehead for their cause. You want me as a puppet, dancing to your tune while you pull the strings. Rookwood's expression flickered. That's not, it is exactly what you want. I can see it, Rookwood. Not your thoughts, maybe, but your patterns. Your strategies. Everything you've done since Voldemort's fall has been positioning yourself for this moment, the moment when you could offer the boy who lived a partnership that's really just another form of control. Harry stood. I told you when we started, I'm not a chess piece. I'm not a weapon. I'm not anyone's puppet or figurehead or means to an end. He looked down at the architect, who was sitting very still. I'm going to stop Voldemort. I'm going to dismantle the faithful. And then I'm going to build something new, something that doesn't require people like you at all. Rookwood's acclimacy cracked, just for a moment, and Harry caught a flash of genuine emotion beneath. Not anger. Not fear. Respect. You really believe you can do all that, Rookwood said softly. A 10-year-old boy, alone against forces that have shaped the wizarding world for centuries. I'm not alone. Harry walked toward the door. I have friends. Allies. People who believe in something better than power and purity. That's what you've never understood, Rookwood. That's why you'll lose in the end. He paused at the threshold. Your men outside, tell them to stand down. I'm leaving, and if anyone tries to stop me, I'll make sure the Ministry knows exactly where to find the architect of the faithful. You would expose me? Risk all-out war? I would do whatever's necessary to protect the people I care about. Harry smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. That's the difference between us. You serve ideals. I serve people. He walked out into the cold morning air, his scar throbbing with each heartbeat. Behind him, Rookwood sat alone in the empty pub, his perfect composure finally, fully shattered. The attack came 3 days later. Harry was walking back from the library when he felt them, 5 minds, shielded but not perfectly, converging on his position from multiple directions. He had perhaps 30 seconds before they reached him. He ran. The corridors of Hogwarts blurred around him as he sprinted toward the one place he knew he'd be safe, Dumbledore's office. The faithful wouldn't dare attack him there, not with the most powerful wizard in Britain watching. He didn't make it. The first curse caught him in the back, a stunner that should have dropped him instantly. Instead, it splashed against his skin like water, absorbed by wards he hadn't known he possessed. The Potter family ring flared with heat on his finger, ancient magic recognizing an attack on its heir. Harry spun, his wand already in his hand, and faced his attackers. 5 wizards in dark robes, their faces hidden behind masks that looked uncomfortably like skulls. Death Eaters, or close enough, the Faithful's enforcement arm, sent to deliver a message. You should have taken the architect's offer, the lead wizard said, his voice distorted by magic. Now you'll learn what happens to those who refuse. Harry didn't waste breath on a response. He reached into the lead wizard's mind and pushed. The man collapsed, screaming, his hands clawing at his head. His partners hesitated, thrown off by the sudden reversal, and Harry used that moment to strike. He wasn't gentle. Couldn't afford to be. These weren't schoolyard bullies or ministry bureaucrats, they were trained killers sent to kidnap or murder him, and Harry responded accordingly. The second wizard went down to a stunner powered by fear and fury. The third tried to apparate and found herself frozen in place, Harry's will clamping down on her magic like a vice. The fourth actually managed to get a curse off, something dark and painful that left burns across Harry's arm, before Harry seized his mind and turned his own spell against him. The fifth wizard ran. Harry let him go. His message had been delivered clearly enough. Dumbledore found him 10 minutes later, sitting in the corridor surrounded by unconscious bodies, his arm bleeding sluggishly onto the ancient stones. Harry. The headmaster's voice was gentle but urgent. What happened here? The faithful sent a message. Harry looked up, his face pale but composed. I sent one back. Dumbledore's eyes swept over the fallen wizards, his expression unreadable. Harry caught flickers of thought through those impenetrable shields, shock, concern, and beneath them something that might have been pride. You defeated 5 trained combatants by yourself. Without serious injury. The Potter ring helped. And they underestimated me. Harry struggled to his feet, wincing as his burned arm protested. They won't make that mistake again. No. I don't suppose they will. Dumbledore guided him toward the hospital wing, his ancient hand surprisingly gentle. Harry, I think it's time we had a proper conversation. About the prophecy. About your abilities. About what you've been doing these past few months. I think you're right. Harry let himself be led. But first, there's something you need to know. Yes. Voldemort is at Hogwarts. He's possessing Professor Quirrell. Harry met Dumbledore's eyes. And I think he's planning to make his move very soon. For just a moment, Dumbledore's perfect composure cracked. Harry saw shock, followed by rapid calculation, followed by a determination as hard and bright as diamond. Then we have much to discuss indeed, the old wizard said. And very little time to discuss it. They walked together toward the hospital wing, the fallen wizards forgotten behind them. The game had changed. The pieces were moving. And Harry Potter was done playing defense. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, the mind unveiled. The hospital wing smelled of healing potions and old magic, and Harry sat on the edge of a bed while Madame Pomfrey clucked over his burned arm with professional disapproval. Curse damage, she muttered, applying a salve that stung before it soothed. Dark curse damage, on a first-year student. In my 30 years at this school, Poppy. Dumbledore's voice was gentle but firm. Perhaps you could give us a moment. The matron shot the headmaster a look that suggested she had opinions about moments and their timing, but she withdrew to her office, leaving Harry and Dumbledore alone in the moonlit ward. So. Dumbledore settled into a chair beside Harry's bed, his blue eyes grave behind their half-moon spectacles. Professor Quirrell. He's been possessed since before the term started. Maybe longer. Harry flexed his bandaged arm, testing the healing. There's a second presence behind his eyes, something cold, calculating, old. It watches the students during meals. It's been particularly interested in me. And you've known this for how long? Since the sorting. Harry met Dumbledore's gaze without flinching. I wasn't sure at first. The presence is well hidden, and Quirrell's surface thoughts are convincing. But my scar reacts to it. Every time I get close, the pain, your scar. Dumbledore's voice was thoughtful. The connection between you and Voldemort. I had wondered if it might manifest in some way, but I never anticipated. He paused. Harry, I must ask you something directly. How did you defeat those wizards tonight? Harry had been expecting this question. He'd spent the walk to the hospital wing deciding how much to reveal, calculating risks and benefits with the cold precision that had kept him alive for 10 years. The time for secrets was over. I'm a natural Legilimens, he said. I've been able to read minds since I was 4 years old. Dumbledore went very still. The night my power awakened, I was locked in my cupboard, starving, desperate. Something inside me reached out, and suddenly I could hear the Dursleys' thoughts. All of them. Every secret, every cruelty, every lie they'd ever told themselves and each other. Harry's voice was steady, but the memories still carried weight. I learned everything that night. About my parents, about magic, about the prophecy, or at least, I learned that there was a prophecy. I learned that Dumbledore had left me there deliberately, that the Blood Wards were supposed to protect me, that everyone in the wizarding world thought of me as the boy who lived while I was being beaten and starved in a cupboard under the stairs. Harry, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. Harry cut him off. I'm telling you because you need to understand what I am. I see into people's minds, Professor. Not just surface thoughts, deep memories, hidden motivations, the secrets they don't even admit to themselves. I've been doing it for 6 years, and I've become very, very good at it. Dumbledore was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with something that might have been grief. I have made so many mistakes with you, Harry. I told myself that the Blood Wards were essential, that your suffering was necessary for your protection. I told myself that I couldn't interfere, that the greater good required sacrifice. He shook his head slowly. I was a fool. Yes, Harry agreed. You were. But you weren't malicious. I've seen malice, Professor, I've felt it in people's minds, felt the pleasure they take in causing pain. You never had that. You genuinely believed you were doing the right thing. That doesn't excuse, no, it doesn't. But it means we can work together. Harry leaned forward. I'm not interested in revenge, Professor. I'm not interested in blame or recrimination or making you feel bad about choices you can't undo. I'm interested in stopping Voldemort, protecting the people I care about, and building something better than what came before. And you believe we can do that? Together? I believe we have to try. Harry stood, testing his arm. The pain was fading, the burn healing faster than it should have. Voldemort is in this castle, possessing one of your teachers, planning something that involves the thing hidden on the 3rd floor. The faithful have networks throughout the Ministry and the Wizengamot. And I'm a 10-year-old boy who can read minds but can't yet cast half the spells in the first-year curriculum. He turned to face Dumbledore. I need your help. And you need mine. The question is whether we can trust each other enough to make it work. Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. Harry felt the old wizard's mind pressing against his shields, not attacking, just testing, trying to gauge what lay beneath. He let Dumbledore see some of it, the intelligence, the determination, the hard-won wisdom that had come from years of survival. Finally, Dumbledore smiled. It was a tired smile, weighted with regret, but genuine. You are nothing like I expected, Harry Potter. I know. I rarely am. Then let us begin. Dumbledore stood, his robes rustling. We have a Dark Lord to catch and a castle to protect. And I suspect we have very little time. The plan came together over the following weeks. Dumbledore couldn't move against Quirrell directly, not without proof that the Ministry would accept, not without risking whatever Voldemort might do if cornered. But he could prepare. He could watch. And with Harry feeding him information from Quirrell's surface thoughts, he could anticipate. The thing hidden on the 3rd floor was the Philosopher's Stone. Harry learned this from Dumbledore during one of their late-night strategy sessions. Nicholas Flamel's greatest creation, capable of producing the elixir of life and transmuting base metals into gold. Voldemort wanted it to restore his body, to return to full power, to begin his war anew. Why bring it here? Harry asked. Why put students at risk? Because Hogwarts is the most heavily warded location in Britain. Because I believed I could protect it better than Gringotts could. Dumbledore's expression was troubled. And because I hoped, foolishly, perhaps, that it might draw Voldemort into the open. That we might end this before it truly began. A trap. Of sorts. Though not a very good one, as it turns out. Harry filed this away. Dumbledore was willing to use students as bait, willing to risk lives for strategic advantage. It wasn't malicious, the old wizard genuinely believed the danger was minimal, but it was a calculation that Harry found uncomfortable. Remember this, he told himself. He's an ally, not a friend. He'll sacrifice what he thinks he has to sacrifice. The preparations continued. Hermione and Ron knew something was wrong. They'd been watching Harry for weeks, the late-night disappearances, the intense conversations with Dumbledore, the way he flinched whenever Quirrell entered a room. They were too smart to miss the signs and too loyal to let them go unremarked. The confrontation came in early December, during a study session in an empty classroom. "You've been lying to us," Hermione said. Her voice was calm, but Harry could feel the hurt radiating from her thoughts. "Ever since Halloween, maybe before. Something's happening and you won't tell us what." Ron nodded, his expression uncharacteristically serious. We thought we were friends, mate. But friends don't keep secrets like this." Harry looked at them, Hermione with her desperate need to understand everything, Ron with his fierce loyalty that demanded reciprocation. They deserved better than the half-truths he'd been feeding them. "You're right," he said. "I have been keeping secrets. And I'm going to tell you some of them now. But you have to understand, what I'm about to say can never leave this room. If the wrong people find out, it could get all of us killed." Hermione's eyes went wide. Ron swallowed hard. "Harry," Hermione said slowly, "what's going on?" He told them. Not everything, not the legilimency, not the full scope of his abilities. But the important parts, Quirrell's possession, Voldemort's return, the stone hidden in the castle, the faithful and their networks. He told them about his childhood, about the Dursleys, about how he'd learned to survive in a world that had never wanted him. When he finished, the room was silent. "Bloody hell," Ron whispered. Hermione's mind was racing, Harry could feel her processing the information, fitting it into frameworks, searching for inconsistencies. "The troll on Halloween," she said. "It wasn't an accident, was it? It was a distraction." "Yes. Quirrell let it in so he could get past the defenses on the third floor. He failed that time, but he'll try again. And Dumbledore knows? He's known this whole time. He knows now. I told him after the attack in the corridor." Harry met her eyes. "We're working together to stop it. But we can't move too fast, can't tip Voldemort off that we know. If he realizes we're onto him, he might do something desperate," Ron finished. "Something that gets people hurt." "Exactly." Hermione was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took Harry's hand. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. "Whatever happens, we're with you. Right, Ron?" "Right." Ron's jaw was set. "You're our friend, Harry. And friends stick together." Harry looked at them, really looked, letting their thoughts wash over him without shielding against them. He felt Ron's fear, buried under bravado, and his genuine determination to stand with Harry no matter what. He felt Hermione's worrying mind, already planning, strategizing, figuring out how she could help. And beneath it all, in both of them, he felt something he'd rarely encountered in his life. Love. Not romantic love, they were too young for that, and the circumstances were all wrong. But the love of friends, of companions, of people who had chosen each other and refused to let go. Harry's throat tightened. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Both of you." Neville joined them a week later. It wasn't planned, he simply walked in on one of their strategy sessions and refused to leave until they explained what was happening. His grandmother had taught him to recognize when something important was being hidden, and once he understood the stakes, he insisted on being part of the solution. "My parents fought you-know-who," he said, his round face pale but determined. "They gave everything they had to stop him. I won't dishonor them by running away." Harry studied him, reaching beneath the surface anxiety to the core underneath. Neville was terrified, that much was obvious, but his terror was matched by a resolve that went all the way down. He would die before he betrayed his friends. "Welcome to the team," Harry said. They began training together in secret, practicing defensive spells and escape routes and the 100 small skills that might mean the difference between survival and disaster. Hermione threw herself into research, devouring every book on possession and dark magic that the library possessed. Ron proved surprisingly good at tactical thinking, his chess player's mind finding angles that the others missed. Neville's herbology knowledge became invaluable, he knew which plants could heal, which could harm, and which could create distractions in a pinch. And through it all, Harry watched Quirrell. The professor's surface thoughts remained the anxious, stuttering mess they had always been, but beneath them, the void was growing restless. Voldemort was getting impatient. He'd been waiting for months, gathering strength, preparing for his moment. And he was nearly ready to strike. Christmas brought letters. Harry received dozens, from Augusta Longbottom, expressing approval of the alliance and hope for continued cooperation, from Ironclaw, providing updates on the Faithful's movements, from Narcissa Malfoy, hidden among the official correspondence, asking about Draco's well-being. But the letter that mattered most came from an unexpected source. "Dear Harry, I know I said I wouldn't write until you were settled at Hogwarts, but I heard about the attack. Father mentioned something about the Potter boy getting above himself and I put the pieces together. Are you okay? I've been worried. The magical world seems even more dangerous than I remembered, and you're right in the middle of it. I'm doing well at school. It's boring and the other students don't understand me, but I've made a few friends. Real ones, who like me for who I am instead of who my family expects me to be. That's your fault, you know. Before you, I didn't think I could have real friends. I thought the Malfoys had broken that part of me forever. Thank you for proving me wrong. Stay safe, Harry. The world needs more people like you." Miranda. Harry read the letter 3 times, then tucked it into his trunk with the other things he wanted to keep. Miranda was safe, was making friends, was healing from the wounds her family had inflicted. It wasn't much, in the grand scheme of things. But it was something. He wrote back, "Dear M, I'm fine, better than fine, actually. I've found people here who understand me. Friends who know the truth about who I am and choose to stand with me anyway. It's strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. You were right about the magical world being dangerous. But it's also full of possibilities. I've seen things here that I never imagined possible, and I've learned that even the darkest situations can be transformed if you're willing to fight for something better. Keep making friends. Keep healing. And remember, you're not broken. You never were. The Malfoys threw away something precious when they threw you away. That's their loss, not yours." The end began on a Thursday. Harry woke in the middle of the night with his scar burning like it had been branded with hot iron. Through the pain, he felt Quirrell, or rather, the thing inside Quirrell, moving through the castle, its cold presence cutting through the wards like a knife through silk. He was going for the stone. Harry threw off his covers and grabbed his wand. "Ron! Ron, wake up!" His friend stirred, groaning. "Wah, Harry? What time is it?" "Time to go." Harry was already pulling on his robes. "Quirrell's making his move. We need to stop him." Ron was awake instantly, his face pale in the moonlight. Shouldn't we get Dumbledore? He's not here. I checked. Harry's mind was racing, tracking Quirrell's progress through the castle. There was an urgent message from the ministry, he left an hour ago. It was a trap. The faithful drew him away. So we're on our own. We're all we've got. They woke Neville, then slipped out of the dormitory and down to the common room, where Hermione was waiting. She'd somehow known, or maybe just suspected, and her bag was already packed with potions and supplies. The third floor, she asked. Harry nodded. Let's go. The corridor was dark and silent, the three-headed dog Hagrid had mentioned nowhere to be seen. The trapdoor was open, a square of deeper blackness against the stone floor. He's already through, Harry said. Come on. They dropped one by one into the darkness, landing on something soft and yielding that immediately began to wrap around them. Devil's snare. Neville's voice was steady despite the tendrils climbing his legs. Don't struggle, relax and it will let you through. Harry forced his muscles to go slack, fighting every instinct that screamed at him to thrash and kick. The plant's grip loosened, and he slipped through, dropping into a chamber lit by flickering torches. The others followed seconds later. What now? Ron was breathing hard, his wand out and ready. Now we catch up. Harry started forward, following the psychic trail Quirrell had left. And we stop him. The challenges were almost insultingly simple. A room full of flying keys, Harry spotted the one with the broken wing and caught it in under a minute. A giant chess set that required sacrifice, Ron directed them through with brilliant efficiency, taking a hit that left him unconscious but alive. A troll that was already dead, felled by whatever curses Quirrell had used. Then came Snape's challenge, a room full of potions and a riddle written in flame. Hermione solved it in 30 seconds flat. This one gets you forward, she said, holding up a tiny vial. But there's only enough for one person. Harry looked at her, then at Neville, still bent over Ron's unconscious form. Take Ron and go back, he said. Find a teacher, anyone. Tell them what's happening. Harry, you can't, I have to. He took the vial from her hand. Hermione, please. I need you to trust me. She stared at him for a long moment. Her thoughts were a chaos of fear and determination and something that looked very much like faith. Come back, she said finally. Promise me you'll come back. I promise. He drank the potion and walked through the flames. The final chamber was cold. Not physically, the temperature was comfortable enough. But there was a chill that had nothing to do with weather, a psychic frost that radiated from the figure standing before an ornate mirror. Quirrell turned. Without his turban, his head was strange, lumpy, misshapen, as if something was growing from the back of his skull. Potter. His voice had changed. The stutter was gone, replaced by a flat confidence that made Harry's scar throb. I wondered when you would arrive. Step away from the mirror, Professor. Professor? Quirrell laughed. It was an ugly sound. I haven't been Professor for a very long time. Not since I met my master in the forests of Albania, not since he showed me what true power looks like. He turned fully, and Harry saw the face on the back of his head. It was barely human, pale and stretched, with slits for nostrils and red eyes that burned like embers in the torchlight. Voldemort's face, grafted onto Quirrell's skull, parasitic and hungry. Harry Potter, the face said. Its voice was soft, sibilant, intimate. We meet at last. Harry's hand was steady on his wand, but his heart was racing. This was it. The moment everything had been building toward. You know, I've been looking forward to this, Harry said. Ever since I learned you were hiding behind Quirrell's eyes, I've been wondering what you'd say when we finally talked. Have you? Voldemort sounded amused. And what did you expect? Honestly? More monologuing. You have a reputation for it. Quirrell's face twisted with rage, but Voldemort laughed. You have spirit, boy. Foolish, misguided spirit, but spirit nonetheless. The red eyes fixed on Harry with terrible intensity. I've been watching you all year. You're not like the others, not like the bleating sheep who fill this castle, content with their small lives and smaller ambitions. You see things. You understand things. I understand that you're a monster who murdered my parents. Your parents were casualties of war. Regrettable, perhaps, but necessary. Voldemort's voice was almost gentle. They chose to oppose me, Harry. They chose to protect a prophecy that threatened everything I'd built. I gave them chances to step aside, and they refused. They refused because you were wrong. Harry's voice was steady. Because what you were building was evil, and they knew it, and they were willing to die rather than let you win. And yet here I am. Voldemort's smile was terrible. Not dead. Not defeated. Just, delayed. And now, with the stone in my grasp, I will rise again. More powerful than ever before. Immortal. Invincible. The stone isn't yours yet. A minor detail. Quirrell turned back to the mirror, his movements jerky and wrong. The mirror of Erist. Dumbledore's final defense. Show me what I desire most, and the stone will appear. Harry watched as Quirrell stared into the glass, his face contorting with frustration. I see myself with the stone, Quirrell muttered. I see myself presenting it to my master. But it won't, why won't it? Because you're lying to yourself, Harry said quietly. The mirror doesn't show what you say you want. It shows what you actually want. And deep down, Quirrell, you don't want to serve Voldemort. You want to be free of him. Quirrell spun, his eyes wild. How dare you, I can feel it. Harry took a step forward. Beneath the possession, beneath the corruption, there's still a part of you that remembers who you were before. A scholar, a teacher, someone who wanted to make a difference. Voldemort smothered that part, but he couldn't destroy it completely. Silence. The word came from both mouths at once, Quirrell's face twisted with rage, Voldemort's face cold with fury. The combined force of their anger pressed against Harry's shields like a physical weight. And then Voldemort did something unexpected. He reached into Harry's mind. The assault was like nothing Harry had ever experienced. This wasn't the probing curiosity of the Sorting Hat or the professional pressure of Snape's legilimency tests. This was an invasion, brutal, savage, designed to crack Harry's mind open and feast on what lay within. Voldemort was a Legilimens. A powerful one. And he was trying to take everything Harry had. For one terrible moment, Harry felt his shields crumbling. Memories flashed before his eyes, the cupboard, the hunger, the moment his power first awakened, and Voldemort was there, drinking them in, reaching for more. Then something else rose up. It came from deep inside Harry, from a place he'd never consciously touched. A warmth that pushed back against Voldemort's cold, a light that burned in the darkness of the attack. His mother's sacrifice, he realized. The protection that had saved him as a baby, that still lived in his blood and bones and magic. And something more. Something that was purely his. The power the Dark Lord knows not. Harry stopped retreating. He stopped defending. He pushed back. Voldemort screamed. It was a sound of pure agony, torn from a throat that had forgotten how to feel pain. Harry felt the Dark Lord's presence recoil from his mind, scorched by something it couldn't comprehend. What is this? Harry didn't answer with words. He answered with everything he was. He showed Voldemort his childhood, not the suffering, but what he'd made of it. The choice to understand rather than hate. The decision to remain human in conditions designed to create monsters. He showed Voldemort his friends, Hermione's brilliant determination, Ron's fierce loyalty, Neville's quiet courage. The love they'd offered freely, without conditions, without expectations. He showed Voldemort the truth that the Dark Lord had spent his entire existence denying. That connection was stronger than power. That love was stronger than fear. That the people who chose to stand together, despite everything, could never truly be defeated. Voldemort couldn't bear it. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was blistering, cracking, dissolving like wax before a flame. Quirrell himself was screaming, his body jerking as the thing that possessed him tried desperately to hold on. "You can't," Voldemort hissed. "You can't, I am Lord Voldemort, I am immortal, you're nothing," Harry said. "You're a fragment of a soul, clinging to existence because you're too afraid to face what comes after. And I'm not going to let you hurt anyone else. Ever again." He reached out, not with his wand, but with his mind, and pushed. Quirrell exploded. Not literally, though there was plenty of blood and light and screaming. But the thing that had been hiding inside him, the parasitic darkness that called itself Voldemort, was torn free. It howled in rage and pain and something that might have been terror, and then it fled, a shadow screaming into the darkness, diminished and desperate, running from the boy who had bested it twice. Harry watched it go. His scar was burning, his body shaking, his magic nearly depleted. But he was alive. He was alive, and Voldemort was running. Next time, he thought, I'll finish it. Dumbledore found him unconscious beside the mirror, the Philosopher's Stone clutched in his hand. Later, Harry would learn that the mirror had given him the stone without him even realizing, recognizing in his desire to protect rather than possess exactly the quality that made him worthy of its gift. Later, he would learn that Quirrell had died when Voldemort fled, his body unable to survive without the thing that had been sustaining it. Later, he would learn that his friends had found McGonagall and raised the alarm, that the castle had been in an uproar for hours while he lay insensible in the depths. But in the moment, there was only darkness and silence and the distant sense of something vast watching over him. He dreamed of his mother. She was standing in a garden filled with flowers, her red hair bright against the green, her eyes, his eyes, warm with love. She didn't speak, but he understood anyway. "I'm proud of you. Keep going. Keep fighting. And remember, you're never alone." Harry woke in the hospital wing with tears on his face and a lightness in his chest that he didn't know how to name. The days that followed were strange. Harry was treated as a hero, the boy who had faced Voldemort twice and lived, who had saved the Philosopher's Stone, who had done what no one else could do. Students whispered when he passed, teachers smiled with mingled relief and wonder, and the House Cup was awarded to Gryffindor thanks to the last-minute points Dumbledore granted for outstanding courage and friendship. Harry accepted the attention with practiced grace and let none of it touch him. What mattered was what happened in private. Dumbledore came to see him the day after he woke, and they talked for hours, about Voldemort's survival, about the Horcruxes that the old wizard suspected kept him anchored to life, about the long road that still stretched before them. "You will have to face him again," Dumbledore said quietly. "The prophecy ensures it. But you won't face him alone, Harry. I promise you that." "I know." Harry looked out the window at the lake, sparkling in the summer sun. "I have friends now. People who believe in me. That's more than I ever expected to have. It is also more than Voldemort ever had." Dumbledore's eyes were sad. Tom Riddle was brilliant, powerful, charismatic. But he could never form genuine connections with others. He saw people as tools, as obstacles, as means to his ends. And in the end, that emptiness consumed him. "I won't let that happen to me. I believe you." Dumbledore smiled. "You've already proven yourself stronger than he ever was, Harry. The power the Dark Lord knows not, I think I finally understand what that means." "Love?" Harry smiled wryly. "It's a bit sentimental, isn't it? The most powerful things often are." The final conversation of the year happened at night, beside the lake. Harry had slipped out of the castle after curfew, feeling the need for solitude that sometimes came over him. The grounds were quiet, the stars bright overhead, and he sat on the grass and let his mind drift. He sensed Snape's approach long before the professor reached him. "You're out after hours, Potter." Snape's voice was cold, but something had changed in its edges. "That's a detention." "I know." Harry didn't look up. "I needed some air." Snape was silent for a moment. Then, to Harry's surprise, he sat down on the grass a few feet away. "The headmaster told me what you did," Snape said finally. "In the chamber. Against the Dark Lord. He told you I'm a Legilimens. He told me you were powerful enough to drive the Dark Lord from Quirrell's mind through sheer force of will." Snape's voice was tight. "That is not something I would have believed possible. Neither would I, before it happened." Harry finally looked at the professor, meeting those dark eyes without flinching. "I don't know exactly what I did down there, Professor. I just knew I couldn't let him win. And something inside me responded." Snape nodded slowly. "The ancient protections your mother gave you. Combined with your own abilities." "I think so." They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars reflect off the black water of the lake. "I hated your father," Snape said abruptly. "I hated him because he had everything I didn't: wealth, popularity, the attention of the woman I loved. I let that hatred poison me for years, drive me to choices I can never undo." "I know. But I loved your mother. Loved her from the moment I met her, even though I never deserved her. And when she died," Snape's voice cracked. "When she died because of information I gave the Dark Lord, because of my weakness and my cowardice, you've been trying to make up for it ever since." Snape turned to look at him. His face was pale in the starlight, his eyes haunted. "You see too much, Potter. You always have. It's a gift. And a curse." Harry met his gaze steadily. "I'm not my father, Professor. I never will be. But I'm not going to apologize for existing, and I'm not going to let you punish me for his sins." "I know." Snape looked away. "I've known for a while, I think. It was just easier to pretend. Most things are." Another long silence. "I will continue to be harsh with you," Snape said finally. "In public. The other students expect it, and if the Dark Lord returns, when he returns, my position as a spy depends on maintaining certain appearances." "I understand. But if you ever need help, real help, not the kind that can be provided by your Gryffindor friends," Snape's jaw tightened. "Come to me. For your mother's sake, if not for your own." Harry nodded slowly. "Thank you, Professor." Snape stood, his robes rustling in the night breeze. "Don't thank me. Just stay alive. Lily would never forgive me if I let you die." He walked away into the darkness, leaving Harry alone with the stars and the water and the weight of everything that had happened. After a while, Harry heard footsteps approaching from the castle. Lighter, more hesitant. Hermione and Ron appeared out of the shadows, Neville trailing behind them. "We noticed you were gone," Hermione said. "We were worried." "I'm fine." Harry smiled, a real smile, warmer than most he'd managed in his life. "Just thinking." "About what?" Ron dropped onto the grass beside him with his characteristic gracelessness. "About what comes next. About Voldemort, and the faithful, and all the things we still have to face." "Sounds heavy." Ron made a face. "Can't we take a break? It's almost summer. Voldemort won't take a break." "No, but we could." Hermione settled onto Harry's other side, and Neville found a spot nearby. "We've done enough for 1 year, haven't we? Saved the stone, fought the Dark Lord, survived first year at Hogwarts. I think we've earned a few months of peace." Harry looked at his friends, really looked, letting their thoughts and feelings wash over him without his usual defenses. He felt Ron's loyalty, fierce and unquestioning. He felt Hermione's love, deep and enduring. He felt Neville's courage, growing stronger every day. They had no idea what he could do. No idea that he could read their every thought, see their every secret. And yet they loved him anyway. Trusted him. Believed in him. It was, he realized, the most valuable thing anyone had ever given him. A few months, he said finally. Then we start preparing for next year. Deal. Ron stuck out his hand, and Harry shook it. To the summer, then. And to coming back in September ready to kick more dark wizard arse. Language, Ronald, Hermione said primly, but she was smiling. They sat together by the lake, for children who had faced the darkness and emerged stronger for it. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, indifferent to the struggles of the world below. Harry looked up at the sky and thought about everything that lay ahead. Voldemort would return. The faithful would continue their plots. The prophecy would demand its due. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had friends. He had allies. He had a power that even the Dark Lord couldn't comprehend. And he had something else, too, something he'd built for himself over 10 years of suffering and survival. He had hope. In the castle above, Dumbledore stood at his window, watching the small figures by the lake. Fawkes trilled softly on his perch, and the old wizard smiled. "Yes, old friend," he murmured. "I think you're right. I think we may have a chance after all." He turned back to his desk, where a letter awaited his response. It was from the Ministry, one of Amelia Bones's carefully encrypted communiques, and it contained information about Rookwood's movements that demanded immediate attention. The game was far from over. In many ways, it was only beginning. But for the first time in years, Albus Dumbledore felt something he had almost forgotten. He felt hope, too. In Wales, Augustus Rookwood sat alone in a darkened room, reading reports from his network. The Potter boy had survived. More than survived, he had driven the Dark Lord's remnant from Quirrell's body through sheer force of will, demonstrating abilities that exceeded even Rookwood's most optimistic projections. The architect smiled. The game had changed, yes. But that just made it more interesting. "Sleep well, Mr. Potter," he murmured to the empty room. "Enjoy your summer, your friends, your childish illusions of victory." He picked up a quill and began to write. The real contest hasn't even begun yet. And in the darkness between worlds, in the spaces where life and death blurred together, a shadow that had once been a man stirred and seethed and plotted. Harry Potter had beaten him twice. A child, a mere child, had humiliated the greatest dark wizard the world had ever known. It would not happen again. Voldemort gathered the tattered remnants of his power and began, slowly, to plan. He would return. He would have his body back, his power back, his immortality secured. And when he did, Harry Potter would learn what it truly meant to face Lord Voldemort. The prophecy had spoken. One would die at the hand of the other. Voldemort intended to make certain it wasn't him. Far above, the stars continued their endless dance, indifferent to the struggles of the small creatures below. But somewhere in that vast cosmic pattern, something shifted. A balance tipped. A destiny began to unfold. And the story of Harry Potter, the boy who could see into minds, who had chosen love over power, who refused to become a monster no matter what the world threw at him, was only just beginning.